Good afternoon and welcome to everybody to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. So we'll make a start with the usual housekeeping. So I would advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise anyone in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. And it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So first item on the agenda is apologies. So can I check if there are any apologies for any members? No. And we have, I think, advance notice that both Cara and John are joining remotely today. So as usual, if there's any issues with audio or access to the meeting, do just let the clerk and the team know and we will do our best to resolve that. So item 2 on the agenda then is chairperson's business. So a couple of things to raise here. First thing, and it's just a logistical one and a diary reminder really. So we have a stakeholder event which is taking place on Tuesday of next week. And that's running from 5 to 7 p.m. in the Long Gallery. And we found, I think, on other issues that this format has been really helpful in terms of getting evidence on legislation that's coming through and on other inquiries that the committee has run. So we're hoping to get good attendance. So it will be run on that sort of round table basis that we've done in the past. So it would be really good to get member attendance for that. And that will be evidence that will feed into our SEN provision inquiry. So I would encourage members to attend. Just realising I don't think I have my phone on mute, which would not be ideal. So that started ringing. So that's just a note for diaries. The next issue that I wanted just to raise at the start of the meeting, I think we obviously know that there has been significant discussion and debate around the Education Minister's visit to the Middle East, and we now know that there is a motion of no confidence that is going to be debated in the chamber next week. So clearly committee is not going to reach an agreed position on that matter, and I'm not going to try and seek one on that. But as we are sitting in the Education Committee, I wanted just to make some initial remarks on the matters pertaining to education specifically and the Education Department. I would have significant concerns around the use of the departmental platforms to profile that school visit in what was clearly, by anyone's definition, going to be a controversial trip and visit. So I think there are a number of questions around the departmental processes. We've had assurances from the Minister in the Chamber around a clean bill of health, I think is the phrase that was used, that the Permanent Secretary has given in relation to that. So I would want to suggest at this stage that we have our opportunity in the Chamber next week for members across different party perspectives to bring their own views to the table at that stage. But I would want to say from the Education Committee's perspective, it would make sense to me to call the Permanent Secretary to give evidence to answer some of those questions around advice that may have been sought or given in relation to the visit, in relation to the use of departmental platforms, what capacity the Minister was acting in, what consideration has been given or indeed is currently being given to taking any of those posts down, interactions with issues pertaining to UK foreign policy on engagement in the occupied territories, the appropriate approach to private ministerial engagements which have a political dimension to them. So there's a lot of issues in the mix which have all been aired already. So that's the first thing that I would really just want to I think it would seem odd not to reference it given the level of public interest there has been in this issue. That is my suggestion at this stage for the committee to take, and for obviously the options then will unfold, and we'll see how the week progresses next week in the Assembly Chamber. So I'll bring the Deputy Chair in and then I'll open up to other members. I can see Cara has indicated there and Kathy indicated.
Yeah, Chair, I agree with the suggestion to bring in the Permanent Secretary. I think this story has some way to run yet. I don't think all the questions have been answered satisfactorily, and it would be good to unpick some of the issues with the Permanent Secretary himself.
I would also maybe want to add to that. I think if in advance of that, if it was possible for the committee to have sight of the report that the Permanent Secretary has done, I think would be helpful to understand the scope of that and what was considered. Cara, you've indicated there.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add comment that I'm deeply disappointed in the tone as well of the urgent oral during the week. I just thought it was a disgrace, if I'm being frank, and I've been very firm that I think that the minister's trip to Israel, the very essence of the trip is political in nature, and I think we have serious concerns about how Department of Resource was used, and I would welcome the opportunity to hear directly from the Permanent Secretary, as I know others on committee would. I think that this minister has had a series of solo runs, whether it's not utilising and working closely with the committee on school uniform, appointment of certain individuals within the Education Authority, and due to this trip, I think that I would like today to put a vote of no confidence to the committee. It's deeply regrettable, but I do think the level of public interest and the level of public concern regarding this minister, like his actions over the past week, I would like to put a vote to committee today.
Okay, thank you, Cara. So we have a proposal on the table there. I'll bring Cathy in, who'd already indicated. Yeah.
Well, Chair, just on the back of what Cara's saying, I'm happy to second that proposal that Cara's made. I just want to take this opportunity to voice my absolute disgust at the actions of the minister in recent weeks, but see his behaviour in the chamber during the week, as Cara had mentioned, it's like nothing I've ever witnessed before. I had actually thought that there might be a suggestion of actually asking the minister to come in front of the committee and ask questions of him, but I think he proved in the chamber during the week that would be pointless. I believe that when someone is confident in their actions, they answer questions. But when they're not confident, they lash out. And I think we've seen a minister this week who his behaviour has shown that he's just run out of answers at this point. I think it's very clear, or very important, that as a committee we remember that this is surrounded with a backdrop of a number of failings. We are sitting in the midst of a SEN crisis. We have a SEN reform plan that we hear time after time is not fit for purpose. We hear witnesses in constantly talking about it. We have discussed at length before about a flawed RAISE programme. We had an opportunity to provide equality for girls in allowing them to wear trousers to school. The minister chose not to do that. We've heard it before as well. He misled this committee. This committee was misled around the school uniform, the whole process of that bill. I'm also not afraid to say that we have a minister who I feel has lost the faith of so many schools, so many principals, so many teachers, Senkos, classroom assistants, parents, because they're reaching out to us day after day. And finally, and perhaps maybe the most concerning part for me, is that we have a minister who feels that it's appropriate to stand in the chamber and frame genocide that is being committed by the Israeli occupation forces as self-defence. And we as a committee need to take this very, very seriously and consider how we move forward on it. So I'm happy, more than happy, to second Cara's proposal.
Thank you, Cathy. David, you had indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair. It'll not be a surprise to anyone to learn that I don't support the proposal, though I'm sure we'll have it, and it'll be as toothless as the one we'll next week, because it won't affect a thing. I think that the Minister was confident in his answers that he gave. He gave the answers all the respect that they deserved, the questions all the respect they deserved in the Chamber. I was very happy to join him on the visit to the school, as members of other parties were, and I think it's entirely appropriate that when the Education Minister visits a school that he is able to publicise that. It came at no cost to the taxpayer, no cost to ourselves, but I think it's entirely appropriate where, as he has done elsewhere, where he visits schools in other countries, he's entitled to do so. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of this next week, and I don't intend to get into it now. But we'll take different views on this. The vote will no doubt go as everybody expects it to go. But again, there'll be no outcome to that. I would remark on the idea, I having visited Israel last week, having watched the news as everyone else has, I don't believe that there's a genocide in Gaza. I think it's no surprise that the UN says what it says. The UN always has a heavily loaded bias against Israel on just about every subject that comes to it, and so I'm not prepared to take their answers on that. The very reason that genocide is used against Israel and against the Jewish people is because of what was done to them. It's Holocaust inversion, and I think it's disgusting that we have that, but Thank you very much, Chair.
Could I ask a question, Chair, through yourself to David?
If I could just come in first myself, I think one of the reasons why the proposal I made at the start of this meeting was to bring the permanent secretary was just to keep a focus on matters pertaining to education specifically, because while there will be strongly held views, which we all have around the issue of Israel and Palestine around this table, I think we do need to just be conscious around, for those watching the committee, to what extent they would consider that to be within our remit for extensive conversation. I think some of those discussions are better placed in the Assembly Chamber next week, and I think it is right and appropriate that we will be having those discussions in the Assembly Chamber. So I put that just as my own comment at this stage, but happy to bring you in, Deputy Chair, but I would ask if we can move very briefly towards dealing with the proposal.
And just a question for David. I'm just wondering, when you went on the visit to that school, were you aware that that school was in illegally occupied land under international law?
I personally probably wasn't aware specifically of the location of the school within Jerusalem, whereabouts in Jerusalem, but it wouldn't have prevented me attending the school, I have to say.
You would have gone anyway, even if you had
I was there. We visited Golan Heights. There was other areas where Israel maintains control for the defence of its own nation, and I have no problem with that.
Gary, you had indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, there has been a lot of anger over this past number of days. Thankfully, a lot of that anger was allayed whenever the Minister directly challenged and called out the blatant hypocrisy, not only from Pat Sheehan but from others across the chamber. I think that this has been exposed as once again another manufactured crisis, one which isn't reflected certainly on the ground, and the people that I speak to from right across the board. People have bigger priorities other than try and pick issue with an education minister who was entitled to go on a visit to Israel, as was the leader of the SDLP going to Beirut and Lebanon at the taxpayers' expense, despite the fact that the Minister for Education didn't incur any expense. The urgent oral question on Tuesday, I think, was quite interesting, to say the least, because I don't know whether people didn't do the research or they didn't. Certainly the questions that were needed to be asked from an education perspective weren't asked. The Minister answered all of them effectively on the radio on the Monday morning on the Nolan show. So I think people see right through the real motives as to this is not about education. This is about people's views in respect of their positions in the Middle East. I think there's no place for it in this committee. I think that the agenda that we have today is much more important than trying to feed people's political ideologies, and for that reason, obviously, we'll not be supporting the vote of no confidence in the Minister. And I think that people really should have a look at themselves and don't be led by some of the most extreme elements within our society.
Thank you, Gary. Danny, you had indicated.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose Israel's probably rubbing its hands that they found people who were so willing to sell their souls to whitewash the genocide that has taken place in Gaza.
What is report that, Danny?
Okay, I didn't interrupt you when you were speaking.
I could ask you just keep your remarks through the chair, please.
And I suppose that this was a litany of behaviours from the Minister. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. I have so many principals, teachers, pupils, parents from right across the piece who have contacted me in utter disgust. And that trip to Israel, as portrayed by the Department for Education, regardless of what was in that statement, it was that he was there as the minister who is in charge of the welfare of our teachers, of our children, and it is absolutely disgraceful that he done that, and that's why it should be discussed in this committee. And I thank Carr for bringing it forward and giving us an opportunity to vote of no confidence in him from this committee, but also next week. It will be the majority of MLAs. It will be the vast majority of society where the DUP or political unionism doesn't want to hear that or believe that. That is the facts. That is the reality. And this is a minister who brought forward a flawed raise programme that would have locked communities, disadvantaged communities, out of tackling educational underachievement. A minister who funded a state-of-the-art pitch which smacked of cronyism. This was a minister who wants to remove AS coursework. This is a minister who has an agenda of a regressive education system that will do harm to our young people going forward. So this is all important, and it is important that he realises that society no longer has any confidence in him, and he should do the right thing, and he should resign. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Michelle, you'd indicated.
Yeah, I'm not going to do a big speech. We have our debate to come on Monday. I just want to echo the comments that genuinely have never had my inbox filled the way it was filled over the past week with genuine concerns from across the board, from parents, from teachers, from general citizens, from kids as well. Just people absolutely finding this very tough, and we'll find those comments today really, really tough. This is not faux outrage. People are genuinely horrified by what's happening. They were horrified on the 7th of October. They are horrified by the ongoing slaughter in Gaza. And actually this is a genuine question. I don't know whether you need to declare an interest here, David, because you were commenting on a trip that was paid for by Israel. People may infer that your comments there were also paid by Israel. So if that needs to happen, I think that'd be right and proper that you did that. But look, we'll get into this more on Monday, and we'll do the vote now. And that'll be it.
Thank you, Michelle.
Could I make one short comment for the record?
Just a brief comment for the record.
I absolutely defend the right of people to support the Israeli state and, to back them whatever way they want. That's fair enough. I mean, knock yourselves out if that's what you want to do. You can do that and still say the slaughter of 20,000 children is wrong. And not one of you has done that yet.
David,
Can I come in there, Chair, please?
I'm just going to give David a chance to respond, and I'll bring you in, John. So, David, just to respond.
Probably formally, I mentioned my attendance on the trip during my contribution, but declare an interest that yes, I was on the trip, and those things will be declared formally as well in due course once we have the necessary details. I'm on record in the chamber long before this trip as saying that the slaughter of all in the war in Gaza is shocking and it's tragic, and unfortunately we see that. And more, I think the issue I have, and I understand we'll disagree, is when it's described as genocide, because I do not see that is not what I see there. But I don't deny for a second. I might question where some of those stats are coming through, given that they come from Hamas. But I would say that I recognise many people and many innocent people have died in Gaza as they did on October 7th, and that's a sorrow for anybody. I don't think I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that's right or something we wanted to see, but it happens, and it happens in any conflict across the world. But the Jews in Israel in particular seem to face particular demonisation whenever they do need to defend themselves. The one thing I would say, Chair, as well is in an earlier contribution we had talk of the need to address important issues like SEN. I have to say, Sinn Féin are currently blocking, we've heard this week, the SEN investment programme coming to the executive. So if that's a priority and something they want to deal with, perhaps Sinn Féin should look closer to home in terms of seeing some of that investment for our SEN children and their families.
Where you get that information from?
Well, we heard it in chamber earlier this week.
From?
We can look back and see.
I thought discussions at the executive were confidential.
I'm going to draw a line on that particular.
If you could give us more information, if you could give us more information.
The finance minister didn't deny it yesterday.
Deputy Chair, David, Deputy Chair and David, I've just asked you both to just draw those remarks to a close, as we've got a lot to get through on the agenda. And John has looked to come in, so I'll bring you in, John.
Yeah, look, the Ulster Youth Party, we haven't been supporting any of these motions of no confidence. We didn't sign Timothy's petition in relation to Minister Long, who I've been very critical of. There's many ministers that I think are underperforming, and unfortunately it would just destabilise the executive if we back them. I think also the issue of moralising on these issues and making it a point to support a motion of no confidence. There are many members of the executive, including the First Minister. There's members of the policing board who believe that murder in the past was correct, and can't say that murder in the past was wrong. So unfortunately, we just have to work with those things, and we're focused on the task in hand. I know there's so much to do in education, and I just want to keep focusing on trying to deliver for people who need us. So we'll not be supporting the motion.
Thank you, John. So look, I'll just bring that to a conclusion. There's obviously a range of different views on this matter in the room. I want to just be clear from my perspective. Anything in relation to this issue is not faux outrage. Elected reps are very good at saying they've been inundated by contact. I have been genuinely inundated by contact on this issue, and most of that arose following the promotion of the trip on the departmental site. That was the issue that for most people where they felt a line had been crossed and were moved to contact their elected reps. So I do want to make that clear. I think it's important that we're not using structures to play sort of petty political games, and I think if there are points of principle we should be clear on that. But I think I'll draw the discussion to a close. I'll just bring Cara in just if you want to clarify your proposal, and it's very clear there's not agreement, so we'll move to a division on that, and I'll ask the clerk to take us through that.
Chair, just to declare that the Education Committee of Northern Ireland votes C's given with no confidence whatsoever, and I think that comes directly from listening to the people of Northern Ireland, listening to the principals and the teachers, and confidence in his ability to serve all of our people here the best way that he can following his actions last week.
So Clark, I'll hand over to you just to go through the vote.
So the proposal is that the Education Committee records a vote of no confidence in the Education Minister as a result of his actions last week and education stakeholders' reactions to that.
Following concern, and then I suppose also noting that the Northern Ireland Teaching Council really re-emphasised about the point and the importance of the Department of Education remaining politically neutral. I think that really is the key driver here, and it's important, and no confidence whatsoever.
So education stakeholders' concerns come again, Cara, that last bit.
Neutrality of the department.
Neutrality, political neutrality.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll give it to you again. That the Education Committee records a vote of no confidence in the Education Minister as a result of his actions last week and education stakeholders' concerns re his political neutrality.
Yeah, perfect.
Chair, that sounds very, very broad.
Yeah, I would personally, my preference would be if we are going to move to a vote on this, that we are clear it is around his actions in relation to the trip to the Middle East specifically.
Yeah.
I think John's points are relevant. There are many issues we will profoundly disagree with other ministers on, and we don't arrive at this point. So I think it's important to be clear on that. If other members are in agreement.
Trip to the Middle East last week.
Yeah,
Trip to Israel last week.
Israel. That the Education Committee records a vote of no confidence in the Education Minister as a result of his trip to Israel last week and education stakeholders' concerns re his political neutrality.
Yeah, I'm wondering in the last line, should we include the importance of departmental political neutrality? Because I think the real bone to pick here is
the impact on
the minister is entitled to his own political beliefs, but it has been the use of departmental resource and platform. So just that last line, departmental political neutrality as well.
Okay, want it all again?
Yes, please. I don't think we want to be in a space of saying that we believe ministers should be neutral on all issues, or we wouldn't get very much done. So
the technicality of it's the department.
So that the Education Committee records a vote of no confidence in the Education Minister as a result of his trip to Israel last week and education stakeholders' concerns re departmental political neutrality.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you.
So all those in favour of the proposal, members, please say aye.
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 Okay, that is 6 members in favour. Contrary, if any, no.
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 3 members against. So the proposal is carried.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for taking us through that process.
Thank you.
I had a rather more prosaic proposal around inviting the Permanent Secretary to committee to give evidence on this. I would still like to put that to members if that is something we're content to agree, as that we can really get into the detail of the processes around this, and I would like to suggest that be done with a degree of urgency if members are agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. So
Sorry, can I just add to that there? Because if I remember correctly, the minister said he got himself a clean bill of health from his permanent secretary. If I picked it up properly,
that's my understanding.
After that, could we then maybe go above that to another level and bring the head of the civil service in to explain to us if we don't get satisfactory answers on this?
I don't see any reason why not. I'm just conscious, and the clerk might want to speak to this, that I know that may be an area where the Finance Committee is engaging on in relation to that, but of the civil service wide implications of this. So I think we can certainly take stock after that briefing to see, and if there's already work going on in another committee, then that's the appropriate place for it. We can see how that progresses. Okay, members, that takes us to item 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. So are there any declarations of interest that members need to make in relation to any items on today's agenda? Nope. If anything arises, obviously as normal, please indicate so that can be recorded. So item 4 on the agenda then is matters arising. So just a few things, and just to draw members' attention to your table papers, I'll not go through each page number, but just to make sure that members are aware there are some items for matters arising which you'll find in your table papers. Item 1, refer members to an evaluation report on the impact of the Northern Ireland Forest School Association, page 7, a raised paper on outdoor education at page 32, and then there is a draft committee motion on outdoor education at page 70, and then there is also in your table papers, this is the one we need to refer to, a revised draft motion is tabled. And look, this is something that we have been discussing for some time around a motion on the values of outdoor education and the committee backing an outdoor education strategy. So I would want to open up for members' views, but I am certainly content that goes forward to the business office for scheduling as a committee motion if members are agreed. Are we agreed?
What was that?
Would you like me to?
The forest, the outdoor education motion, the draft motion.
Yeah, that was tabled.
Agreed. Okay. So we have agreement on that. We then have item 2 in matters arising, and that is refer members to page 71 of your packs, and it's a raised paper on decoding phonics. So right back when the Transform Ed agenda was launched by the Minister, we had sought some research on this, and we have something in through now from Raise. This is quite a technical area, and I think it's really good to have some research to help members navigate this, and I would want to suggest we do have officials coming in shortly before Christmas, I believe, on Transform Ed, but I would want to suggest in the new year we then schedule some of the academics who've been in touch with us and potentially Raise to come in to brief us on this, because I think it's important the committee do get a handle on some of this stuff, and we're all conscious of our status as not being experts in some of these areas if we're agreed. Agreed. Item 3 is a table of a draft committee bill terms of reference. I thank the clerk for putting that together. There's an indicative timeline. This is around the potential committee bill around the school uniforms and amendments to the Minister's legislation. So there's a number of things to consider there, but to really to cut through it and to just noting the sort of time we've spent on other issues already. My understanding is that the Bills Office and Clerk Assistant are keen to brief the committee on this in closed session next week so that we can just have an open discussion around next steps and the process from here. That feels to me to be probably the best forum to allow us to set aside appropriate time to discuss that. So all of that material is there to note. And if we're agreed to schedule time in next week's committee to have that wider conversation around next steps in relation to that proposed committee bill, I'm happy that we move on from that basis if we're all agreed.
Agreed.
Members are agreed? Okay.
There's no word on guidelines yet. The Minister said within a couple of weeks.
So we're the last update that I've had is coming days is the phrase that is being used. So we will have to wait and see.
They're good at changing the terminology, that's for sure.
So we will see, and it would certainly be helpful, I think, before we have our conversation next week to have seen those. So we continue to live in hope on the provision of those guidelines. I would just, on this issue of school uniforms more broadly, I think it is important to note, and I don't know about other members, but I am getting contact, particularly from uniform retailers who are very nervous about the fact they haven't seen these guidelines, and that they are waiting for schools to change policies at the last minute, and that was the very thing we got assurances on was not going to happen, and I worry we're potentially skirting close to that as a big risk. Kathy?
Just on your skirting issue.
Yeah, pardon the pun.
But no, in all seriousness, when the Minister was in, it feels like weeks ago now, but when he was in a couple of weeks ago, and I was mentioning around the issue of guys wearing trousers to school, I have been, and I know we talked about being inundated, but I cannot actually explain how many people have contacted me since that around the fact of their daughter not being allowed to wear trousers to school. And actually young women themselves, I think there was something like 2.5 million views on a post that I put on social media, but it was the comments that got to me. People actually saying, is this for real? Is this 2025 that we're living in here? So like, I know we need to see guidelines, but we continue to be assured by the Minister that we see the guidelines will not have any concerns. We need to see them, and like you say, schools, uniform retailers need to see them also.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think we're agreed on that, and we'll hopefully have a wider discussion next week. And then at item 4 in matters arising, you will see that there is in your table papers a draft letter. It was informed by engagement with legal services about the EA's power to prosecute parents of children with special educational needs in relation to issues concerned with attendance. So our understanding is that as the specific correspondents who had initially engaged with the Education Committee, that their issues have been put out into the public domain through the media, that there really doesn't seem to be any barrier to the committee engaging with the Education and Welfare Service directly in open session. I certainly wouldn't be proposing that we host that session to discuss an individual case. I think it is around the service more widely. So there is a draft letter inviting them to come to committee. I'd like to seek members' agreement on that, with one slight caveat for me. If we could maybe just put something in that I would just be interested. The SEN aspect of it is important, but I would like to hear evidence on the prosecution service in its widest sense as well, and not to focus it entirely on SEN. I think we need to really understand the legal framework around that service, the purpose of the service, how it operates, how it's what its accountability structures are. So, if members are agreed.
Agreed.
All agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. That takes us on then to item 5, which is draft minutes. So refer members to the draft minutes of our committee meeting of the 22nd of October, page 97. Can I seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings?
Agreed.
Okay, agreed. Okay, so item 6 on the agenda then, members, and we are obviously now just running behind on time, so I would ask everybody to work with me to help us keep to schedule from here on as best we can. So if we want to bring the witnesses forward, who I think are in the room already, we have an oral briefing from the Reclaim the Enlightenment group. So I would refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 104. And then we have briefing papers from the Reclaim the Enlightenment group, pages 106 to 112. So I'll let you all get settled. I will introduce you. If I get anyone's titles or rules wrong, please do correct me. But joining us today we have John Gray, the chair of the Reclaim the Enlightenment group. We have Helen Armstrong, a counsellor and coach. We have Jim Curran, a teacher and literacy advisor. We have Marrion, an educational psychologist, and James Ward, a lecturer. Now, you're all very welcome to expand on any of your roles and your interest and how you came to be involved in the group, or to speak in more detail about the group and its role. So you're all very welcome here today. I thank you for joining us. I thank you for your patience. We have run over schedule, and I also thank you for your patience leading up to this. We've had to rejig things around to get you slotted in at an appropriate point in our forward work plan. So thank you for bearing with us on that. I'm really looking forward to your evidence session today. So the way that will be structured is to hand over to yourselves for any initial remarks or presentation that you wish to make. If I could ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer, and we try as far as possible to work to, per member, 5 minutes per inquiry, just so that we can ensure everybody comes in. So that requires members and witnesses to work together just around the timings of your answers. It's a big panel, so we would always ask in that scenario, no expectation that each panel member deals with each individual question. So if there are questions that it's appropriate for just one of you to take, so that we can get round everybody and everyone gets the chance to have their input, that would be really welcome. But look, that's all the preliminaries out of the way. I'll hand over. John Gray, is it yourself going to open? So I'll hand over to you, John.
Thanks very much, everybody, for seeing us today. It's a privilege for us and an opportunity for us on what we think are important issues in your field. I am chair of Reclaim the Enlightenment, which is a charity that was formed in 2017, which celebrates Belfast's progressive era in the late 18th century, largely pioneered by radical Presbyterians. And we take inspiration from that with a view to progressive thinking in the present, which we think is badly needed. Education has been a particular concern of ours, as it was for our forebears. Our forebears believed in free and universal education and non-sectarian education. And some of them were pioneers of attempts to provide education on that basis for poor and sometimes starving working class children. So that is a heritage that is worth hanging on to. We organised a conference in November 2023, the proceedings of which were published as Is Our Education System Failing Our Children? And I brought copies of it so that you can all have a hard copy each. And bit by bit, those of us who were involved really reached the conclusion that there were very fundamental problems with our existing education system, that it is failing on a fairly grand scale. This was launched at a second conference organised in conjunction with the University of Ulster in May 2024. And at that point, we decided that, there was the energy and the motive to push forward on this, and we established the Education Reform Group. And these are the members of the Education Reform Group. And there were various areas we could have looked at, but we came to the conclusion that above all, the transfer test is a fundamental problem in our existing education system. Now, while your minister has brought forward a variety of proposals for reform, and nobody could accuse him of not being energetic on numerous fronts, travel included. Nobody could accuse him of not being energetic. But if you look at the various reforms that have been brought forward, some of them have some merit, some have doubtful merit, some seem singularly useless, but all of them evade what seems to us to be the main problem, the effects of the transfer test. And, the transfer test that 50% of our children don't even take, the transfer test which is based on entirely specious, bogus scientific foundations which have been proved to be forged, and which causes damage on a grand scale. And that's really what we're coming to you today. We don't expect you to abolish the transfer test at this meeting. What we actually really want you to do, and I know that there's some in the room here today who are supporters of the transfer test. We respect that. That's your position. But the one thing that I don't think you should do is prevent discussion of the issue. And what we want you to do is to open a serious consultation on the transfer test. And then, once that's been done, once you've considered all the evidence, well, we would hope that light will be cast on this particular aspect of our education system. I'm now going to hand over to Marrion, who is the convener of the Education Reform Group. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Chair. We all feel as if we're coming here for an exam today. We're all slightly nervous, to say the least. But and it's made us think, what is it like for children approaching that time in their lives when they're sitting what we knew as the 11 plus. So we're having those emotions and feelings just now. But we know I know that you're people who obviously care about your own communities, and you obviously care about education when you've decided to join the education. The Committee for Education, and obviously you're the people we need to speak to and to give you our findings. Now, I did waken very early this morning and I actually reread the book, and you know what, it's a terrific read and it's very, very well written, and I think John has copies for everybody which he's not going to charge for, but no, really, anybody interested in education will get an awful lot out of these books, which were produced after our conference, in which we brought an awful lot of educationalists from various aspects of education together, parents, teachers and researchers, and we're very proud of this booklet. We have liaised with other like-minded groups, and we know there are a lot of people out in the community who are very interested and in the proceedings that the education system that we have and how it fails so many children. I don't know if any of you have children going through transfer, and you know how stressful it is at the moment, and how important it is that we give all our children the best possible education, which we feel is not served by separating children into grammar schools and non-grammar schools. So you've had a copy of our presentation, and James Ward is going to present Academic Selection, Time for Change.
Thanks very much, Anne. Thank you to the Clerk and Deputy Clerk for inviting us here today, and for all the members of the committee and the Chair for giving us a hearing today. My name is James Ward. I'm a lecturer at Ulster University, but I am here as a volunteer. I lecture in English literature, nothing to do with the social science of education. I got involved with Reclaim Enlightenment because my work is about what happened in the later 18th century and the progressive movement that started there. And that's been an inspiration for me in daily life. And as John and Anne both said, you know, the past can inspire change in the future, and that's what we firmly believe. And we also, our motto is that there is more that unites us than divides us, and I hope that's something that can be taken out of this presentation today. So our briefing is called Academic Selection at 11, Time for Change. And I just want to say, before I say what is in it, I just want to say why we think this is crucial now. Why are we doing this now? We believe that education policy in Northern Ireland is at a turning point. The current Transform Ed strategy recognises the importance of longer term reform and the need for progressive changes. But there is one thing that's been there in the long term, and it has not changed progressively, and that is academic selection, which has been part of that system since 1947, and that fundamental cornerstone of the system needs to be looked at again. And that's all we're saying in this briefing, really, is that it needs looked at. Just to summarise the 3 points I'm going to go through in a wee bit of detail. Firstly, the empirical evidence shows that there are significant costs to academic selection at 11. Those are financial, environmental and emotional and mental costs. We conducted a poll. We don't have much money, we're a charity, but we did get enough money together to conduct a poll, and we believe, it's in the findings are in the document, we believe that it shows a lack of popular support for selection at 11. And that poll also, we believe, shows that the current system may damage child mental health. Education isn't just about book learning, it's about skills as well as knowledge, and we think that if the skills potential of the society is to be unlocked, we need some change to the system that we currently have. One of the names that repeatedly comes up, both in this committee, in the chamber and among this group here, is the name Lucy Curran. Lucy is the author of the Strategic Review of the Curriculum, and she's also the author of this book here, Cleverlands. What Curran did, she was a science teacher, you probably know this. She took a year out and she travelled around the world looking at what works in the education systems that are ranked the highest in the world. I won't go into that, but if you have a look at that book, or how it's summarised in our paper, you'll see which country she talks about. We can talk about that maybe more in the questions. But one point that really sticks out from that work, and I'm quoting here, Curran says, does early selection support equity by giving academic chances to the brightest from all backgrounds? And the answer is no. No matter what common sense may tell you, the empirical evidence suggests that leaving the division of students until they are a little older means that student scores at 15 are more likely to reflect their potential and effort and less likely to reflect the size of their parents' paychecks. I think that's an important point. I personally am opposed to selection per se. Curran is a bit more pragmatic, a bit more flexible. She says selection can take place, but it doesn't work when it takes place at 11. We currently have a two-tier system where selection is really deselection. 50% of children just do not get involved at all in academic selection. There are arguments that academic selection enhances social mobility and helps disadvantaged children make their way up in society. I would believe that empirical evidence, including research conducted by the Department for Education, does not confirm that. Very brief statistical summary of that is that children who are entitled to free school meals are 5 times less likely to attend a grammar school than children who are not. And I think that really speaks for itself. Parental choice is something that could, maybe be said in favour of academic selection at 11. I've quoted a researcher called Kiston who says persistence of selection the persistence of selection takes place in the face of a robust empirical case for its withdrawal and a lack of evidence for political claims that parents want this process. Our poll, which we conducted, was conducted by Lucid Talk in February of this year. It found that 43% of parents were against academic selection, 40% were in favour, and 17% were undecided. That surprised me. I thought I was, maybe personally very invested in being opposed to selection. I didn't think we would get a plurality against selection. That surprised me. There are also psychological costs to selection at 11. I have a quote there from a person who spoke at our conference, who was named by their initials, and they say, I wonder if her career trajectory may have been different. Talking about her own mother there who failed the transfer test in the 1950s. Another question we asked in our survey was, do you think, if you're a parent, that the transfer test has had a negative effect on your child's mental health? The result there was 42% negative, 28% said positive, 28% said neither positive nor negative. Environmental costs are in excess of 20 million per year and 9,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. That means because education provision is duplicated. That's not just selection, that's also segregation on sectarian grounds as well. But I think it's very difficult to understate the emotional cost of academic selection. I think personally, somebody who passed the 11 plus, I don't think it stood me in the greatest stead emotionally or psychologically. And I can talk about that in more detail anytime you want. We have a couple of quotes from parents here who say one person who spoke at our conference said that her daughter was distraught after failing the transfer test, asked me why was she so stupid. She stopped reading books, she left piano lessons, and she pushed education away. Another person who themselves, going back to the 50s, I think, said they did not pass what was then 11 plus, but they said you don't know that when you're 11, but what they're saying is that you're not worth investing in. So I'm going to finish up now, and I'm just going to make a couple of points that our youth population is shrinking. We need to develop a skills-based economy that rewards lifelong flexibility in learning. That is actively hampered by a population where a significant number of people have been put off 30, 40, 50 years ago by the fact that they took a test or didn't take a test. We believe that selective education is a barrier to social mobility, and we can quote research to prove that, but I'll just conclude with a couple of policy recommendations. As John said, we do not have any agenda other than we want to see a public consultation opened on academic selection at 11. We've tried to do what research we can. We're a charity, we don't have great resources. We've done what research we can into alternatives, and we're happy to talk about those. And Lucy Curran and many others have looked at what works elsewhere. That information is out there. We would love to see that information being discussed in this place. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you all for that, and really good to get this issue on the Education Committee agenda. It's something that it comes up in other contexts, and we often end up agreeing to disagree, but it's good to have an evidence session where we can think in a little bit more detail. There's a whole range of things that I could ask, but I suppose I want to start with what I think for me is the most important question, is how do we facilitate this public conversation that you're referring to? And I'm not really even talking about how does the Education Committee facilitate it, but I think there is a need at departmental level to create a space where these conversations can be aired. My experience has been when certainly when I ask about it, that there is a big resistance from the minister, and that is often framed in terms of there isn't consensus on this, so it's not something I'm going to give any time to. Now, I would argue there are a lot of things the minister is doing that there is not consensus on, and it doesn't seem to have hampered him in any way whatsoever. But on this issue, there does seem to be a sense there's no consensus, so we don't have the conversation. So I suppose I would just want to put it to you, and it's really to set out, how do you feel that a public conversation on this, with the data and the information out there and the experiential evidence out there, so that we can begin to look at this policy in the same way as we would look at any other aspect of educational policy?
I think that the first part of the process could be the assembling of the existing evidence, and there is plenty of it. We were actually in the coffee room there discussing what might be our next step, and we thought that one useful step would be to list each of these reports and documents, and if they're available in virtual form, provide links to them, and under each reference provide a one-paragraph summary of the relevance or significance of the reports. Then beyond that, what you might do is call for expert witnesses and record their submissions. And they could be from a variety of backgrounds. Then, once all that material has been assembled, you could open the process to public consultation and try and reach some form of conclusion. Now, whether it's this committee that reaches some form of conclusion, and you've already had a resolution here today where there was a majority that approved the resolution, but there were dissenting voices that were recorded. Well, that could be the same process at the end of this thing, and then the thing comes before the minister.
Have I understood you correctly that it's a committee inquiry you feel might be helpful, or is it something you feel the department should lead, or is there some other mechanism?
I think it's up to you to decide which is the best way to take. If you're actually serious about investigating the thing, I'm hoping this committee is serious about investigating the whole area. Well, you're perhaps more au fait with the actual mechanisms of the Stormont machine than we are. And so, certainly, I would hope that the department would be willing to get involved in the process. It would be ludicrous if it wasn't, because they have a whole stock of information and data on the subject.
Undoubtedly, this will, what we see in 20 years' time is a complete change to our education system, which will require a cooperation from politicians, from parents, from schools, from existing grammar schools, which will have a very important role to play we see in the future, but not the role that they have now, whereby children are selected at 11 to attend. So it is something that is a big change, and change is always very challenging.
Can I say that the lack of consensus is obviously a huge problem, and they had very, very similar problems in Finland, which prior to the discussion in Finland began in 1947, when they began to look at the education system, which wasn't working for them. It was an education system they had in Finland, which was very similar to the system that we have here with selection, early selection, and secondary schools and grammar schools. And in 1947, they set up a committee which actually met 200 times to discuss change in the education system. The first vote they had on it, it took another number of years. The first vote they had was in 1956 when they voted against comprehensive education. And it took until 1963 until there was another vote, when this time the vote was carried by something like 168 to 63. I'm not actually quite sure, but I know that's roughly what the numbers were. Well, so what we had then was we had consensus, and they moved on. But again, things weren't eventually sorted out because they started in the north of the country, and then they moved on. And it took until 1979 until they had rolled out a comprehensive system right across the country. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of debate. It took a lot of agreement. But in the end, they had consensus. And I think we need consensus. The problem we have now is we haven't got time. We haven't got 10 years, 15 years, 16. We haven't got that time anymore. Because as far as I'm concerned, the education system that we have at the minute is completely selective. It's completely elitist. It reminds me of a quote from T.S. Eliot that the purpose of education is to select and reject and select to raise an elite. And I think that's what we're doing. I taught for, I'm going to have to stop, but I taught for 40, I'm getting a nod from Anne here. I taught for 40 years, and I saw the result of the transfer test. I taught in secondary school, and I saw the failures, and I saw what it did to children. And my view is I'm very passionate. Everybody here is very passionate about it. I just don't think it can continue on.
Well, I wouldn't like anybody to think that it's going to take us 70 years maybe to get where we want to. And we do know that Finland's one of the top performing countries in the world. So it's we all know it's a big job, but I think
let's do Finland and a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not, in the interest of time, I'm not going to ask another question. I think happier to hear from yourselves on this. Like, my views on the transfer test, if they're clear and publicly on the record, I don't think academic selection at 11 serves our children and young people well at all. And I would be very, very open to seeing a new system established. But I think we need that evidence base set out. We need that public conversation. So I think I think it's high time we look at how that can be facilitated. I'm going to bring the Deputy Chair, and I would just ask everybody to just be mindful of time, and if anybody hasn't indicated through the clerk, to do so for any questions.
Thanks, Chair. And I mean, you've already mentioned, looking at empirical and scientific evidence, and moving forward on that basis. The difficulty is the Education Minister here and his party and some of the other parties have set their faces against even having a discussion around academic selection, and that's the difficulty we face. The well-known educationalist, you've all probably heard of him, Sir Bob Salisbury, suggested at one time that we have the longest tail of educational underachievement in Western Europe. There was research carried out, published a couple of years ago, by the Economic and Social Research Institute, which carried out a comparative study of the systems north and south. And it's clear from that study that the north is lagging miles and miles behind the south. There are far more young people going on to third level education in the south than there are here in the north. There's something like 5 times as many young people going on to further education than there are here. And there are far fewer leaving school in the south without any qualifications compared to the north. And how would you, react to that type of evidence that's being produced?
I mean, I would like to speak as a parent, actually, because I came here today. My name's Helen Armstrong, and thank you very much for having us. You know, certainly what I would find is, I mean, I do come from a background of counselling and coaching, and I also have worked in community youth work, but I'm primarily here as a parent just to tell, you know, my lived experience of actually that, especially with my youngest child. I'm a mother of 5, and I have my youngest are twins, and my twins got separated, you know, because of the transfer tests. And you know, certainly my youngest Johnny, I think what I have noticed in him is a change in terms of, I think it is almost, it really could be described as an adverse childhood experience, what's called in psychology terms as an ACE, because I think his mindset has shifted, and he thinks just from that time when he wasn't doing well in his practice tests, and I could just see a mindset becoming more fixed of like, I am not capable, I can't do this. And I think then the trajectory is so on and so forth after that then, really. And I think that in itself, it's about trying to avoid that mindset and that adverse childhood experience, I think, is, you know, I think there's a link between what you're saying of how others seem to, when they're not subjected to something as difficult as having to do a test that is unregulated, and that, you know, actually it's a test that can't be done again as well. I mean, how often are there tests like that in the world where you can't repeat, you know, and it's too high stakes, too high pressured. I could see in him, he is capable, but he is too young. And, you know, and I think that in itself, I think there's a direct correlation between that and the mindset. And I think there is evidence to suggest as well that in boys it's more prevalent, that mindset, where it becomes more fixed. I can't do it, so they opt out. You know.
Can I say just that a wee piece from Professor Siobhan O'Neill, the mental health champion, she just used 2 words to describe the transfer test. She used the words cruel and unethical. And I just, if I'm given a chance, just want to read a wee piece here from the author Michael Morpurgo, the author of children's books on Warhorse. And he failed the test in 1953, and he never, the impact that it had on him and the way that it scarred him, he talked about it in an interview, and I think about 2016, he gave an interview to The Guardian, and this is what he said about it, about the transfer test, about the failure. Failure is the worst thing you can do to a child. It crushes their confidence. I condemned myself because of this failure. You were named and shamed. You knew you had disappointed everyone. At home, there was silent disapproval of the worst kind. This was my first public failure. There were many more to come. My early blithe confidence had been shattered. When asked to read aloud or recite a poem, I stuttered. I longed only for playtime and for the bell at the end of school. And for me, that was very, very powerful, and that summed it up.
And I suppose what we're all saying is that there are an awful lot of children of post-primary age who have lost confidence in themselves and in the education system, who leave school evidenced by the high number of children who are not in education or training that we have in this country. It's evidenced by the statistics that 35% of jobs can't be filled because the skills level of local people applying for them don't match what's needed for the jobs. And really, I think a powerful argument for getting rid of the current system we have is how it affects the economy.
Couple of points.
Just very, very briefly to bring this to a conclusion, to make sure we can get everyone else in. If you just want to finish, John.
Just a couple of points. What I would urge is that, okay, the minister is in favour of the transfer test. Surely the minister shouldn't or can't prevent a serious discussion of the transfer test. And for those in the room here at the moment who I think possibly would consider themselves supporters of the transfer test at this point. I just mention one or two statistics which reflect the effects of the transfer test. On the Shankill Road, 71% of children leave school with fewer than 5 GCSEs. They're actually winners in that awful doom-laden scale by a short head, because on the fulls, it's 63% of children who leave school with 5 GCSEs or less. And you know, if that's what's happening in our deprived communities, well then do you wonder, when we have trouble on the streets, when we have gangs, when people fall into the hands of the paramilitaries rather than advancing into decent opportunities and decent jobs, well, it all stems from failure at an early age. And perhaps the other statistic is that 21.4% of our working population, or working age population, because they're not actually working, have either no or low qualifications. And just think of the damage that that does to our economy. Sorry, I have a tendency to go on. Jim and I compete in that field.
Here. I'll let you have a comment, Pat. Quick comment.
Well, I just want to say, and we all know from sort of mid-primary 5 onwards, the focus in most primary schools is on the exam. And I'm just wondering, is it not therefore the case that the whole curriculum must be warped by that concentration on the selection test?
Yeah, it's certainly been my experience, you know, again, as a parent, you know, that I would totally agree there is blatant curriculum distortion, you know, there. It starts around kind of P6 and certainly, I'll tell you a little story just to highlight that, or one of the aspects of this distortion is like the twins that I mentioned. My youngest two had a good school friend called Archie, and Archie had no intention of going to the local grammar school, but he was still doing the tests in the class. So his dad confided in me and said, oh, well, just to quote verbatim, look, Archie would only get left behind and end up just doing some colouring in at the back of the class if he doesn't take part. And I think that is one aspect of, you know, where there's an over-focus on literacy, numeracy, but also it's for those that have decided not to suffer, and I think also it's the detriment of every child as well, because it crowds out all the other aspects of the curriculum. So for me as a parent, that was certainly my experience, and I just thought there must be a misalignment here between the statutory curriculum from P6, P7 anyway, definitely.
Thank you. Thanks.
Could I just say, Nick, on the curriculum, maybe 1 second. I read the evidence, that Lucy Crahan's evidence on June the 18th to the committee, and she said very, very clearly that the transfer test does skew the curriculum significantly.
But it was ultimately not on her remit to make
No,
recommendations.
it wasn't, because that was another problem.
The fact that she chose to comment on it, I think, is worthy of note. So I would just ask, we always, when we have a big panel, it's always a challenge because everybody has a lot of stuff they want to say, but we can't have the deputy chair being disgruntled or only getting one question in. So just for everyone else, there probably will be follow-up questions. So just to bear that in mind if we are working to a sort of 5-minute window of time. So David, if you want to come in.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I'm not being rude if I cut in on some of the answers because I do have 2 or 3 questions. I would like to get in and maybe group the first ones. First of all, you'll not find it surprising that I probably disagree with it. I find it very interesting, but that's probably not unusual that I disagree, given that probably I disagree with sort of New Light and the Aryan sort of thinking in which some of it's rooted. But it's not the way in which I'm going to approach this. I just want to ask, you've talked about selection, you've talked about the transfer test, but there was some mention of selection at other ages. Can I ask, are you in principle objecting to academic selection at any time, specifically at 11? What do you think of the Dixon plan, for instance? And I'll give you that to start with.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go on, you.
All right, so I said I'm personally opposed to selection at any age, but what I'm in favour of is pragmatic solutions that work better than the current one. If there had to be selection, Crean's book says selection at 15 works a lot better than selection at 11, and that's a pragmatic response.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Brooks, can I just make a comment on that? We know from the research that when you look at the PISA scores, over the last 25 years, the only country, as far as I'm aware, that features in the top 10 countries, that the only one that has early selection is the Netherlands. So it's not a formula. Early selection is not a formula for academic success or educational success, and it's basically that's the proof is in their scores basically, and what happens.
Well, look, I mean, we've heard different stories and accept that everyone has different experience of this. I mean, mine is that I went to Grosvenor Grammar School, and for me, a lot of the people I went to grammar school with were from working class areas, and I therefore, in my personal experience, have seen the benefit of people from working class areas being able to access that education that they wouldn't. And that's probably what my next question is about: is how would you prevent a system whereby you have de facto selection by wealth, whereby parents who can afford good houses afford houses around good schools and so on, as we see in some parts of England, not all parts, but in some parts. How would you prevent that happening so that you don't have that bias against working class communities by de facto?
Okay, can I answer that question? Is that all right? Okay. I get told off lots of times. I'm sorry, I'm apologizing. The Sutton Trust has done a lot of research on that. And I'm just looking at some of the research from 2020 from the Sutton Trust under the title of A Fair Choice. So what they do sometimes is they will, places will be allocated at a school as normal. But you could allocate, say, 50% of places on location or on a sibling at the school, but then there will be a percentage that are reserved places for a random draw. You could also, one of the things you could do would be to give priority to disadvantaged children and their families, give first priority in selection. Or they also talked about things called banding tests, whereby all applicants for the school, they did the same test, and then there are equal numbers taken from each band. So there are ways and there are things that can be done to avoid the selection by house price.
Yeah, and that's a very good question, actually.
It is, absolutely.
We've thought about it.
No, look, I'm interested
And the Dixon plan is something that we thought
worth looking at.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not something I know an awful lot about, I have to say, but it's something I'm aware of. So it was. But yes. I thank you for your answer. I think it's worth thinking about. It sounds, there's complexity there, but it's something at least you've given thought to. On the third question, jumping ahead, I did note, and since you had the jibe at the Education Minister around travel, that one of your colleagues within his contribution noted that the other place that he could think of in doing integrated education was schools in Israel that where Arabs, Jews and Christians attend together. You might have heard that I visited one of those schools last week and seen the benefit of that as well. But he goes on to then have a dig at politicians who are seen to be in any way critical of integrated education. I mean, I've said and been on the record, there's those that serve my constituency are very good schools, and I'm very happy to work with them. But would you accept that it's not correct to say that it's correct to say that there are schools outside the integrated system within Northern Ireland who do have a significant mix? We've had one mentioned in this context, actually, with St Colum's Bannis and Bangor, which has 40% Protestant pupils despite being a Catholic school. It's true to say that Christian influence within schools is not a barrier, or denominational influence within schools, light touch or as it may be, is not a barrier to other people accessing those schools where they wish, and that's not a preserve of the integrated sector.
Well, I do notice that your minister
John, if you could respond and for it to be as a brief, succinct response.
Well, yeah. I noticed your minister has suggested that both the existing sectors could be considered as integrated schools. I mean, for a school to be genuinely integrated, it requires that at board level it reflects the full range of the population, rather than having, as of right, religious transferors or trustees of one faith or the other on the board. That, okay, there are schools where there is a minority have come in from the other side, but it's not adequate for them to have to leave their identity at the school gate. That is not proper integration.
That's the case. And actually there's many new communities coming into many of the schools that aren't integrated as well within my own constituency as well. So the integrated label maybe doesn't reflect the diversity of the community and population at this stage.
Well, there is a problem that the integrated sector faces, which is that under the 1989 legislation and the 2022 legislation, the founding formulation of the balance between Catholic and Protestant remains, but the percentage of others who are signifying that they're neither Catholic nor Protestant is increasing, which means that actually in some integrated schools where they have a fixed quota for others, others are actually getting turned away. And it's also true that under the Department of Education's own evidence, the existing integrated schools are oversubscribed. And we're still in the position where 60% plus of the population are in favour of education, and only 8% of pupils are catered for in integrated schools. So I question...
Integrated brand, but there are schools that are more integrated. But listen, thank you very much for your response, and I thank your colleague as well for the positive example of what schools in Israel are doing, similar to here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So just to remind members, we've currently 6 members have indicated, so we're definitely up against it in terms of time. So I'm going to have to ask, as this is such a fascinating evidence session, I'm just going to have to ask everybody to work with.
I indicate as well.
Okay, so that's 7 members we can add. So we will need to get to questions quickly and to try and keep the answers as succinct as possible. So I will bring in Kathy next.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. It's been really interesting, and it's very clear the passion that you all have for this topic. Something that you mentioned, James, I'd like to pick up on about there seems to be this belief, and it's an argument that's often used, that grammar schools promote social mobility. Yeah. And I know within your pack here you've actually stated that it's a barrier. Could you expand on that and just give us a bit more information on that?
So I mean the real crucial statistic is, this free school meals 5 to 1. I think that there is no social mobility there at all. Quick anecdote: poet Adrian Rice from the Rathcoole Estate, North Belfast, deliberately failed his 11 plus because he wanted to play soccer and not rugby at school. And that says so much about social class and division. Like it's mental.
And I note in the research as well is around those who are able to access tutoring, those who are able to coach their children, and the impact that has as well on it. The other thing I wanted to ask, and I know there's Jim and Anne, you're both have done a lot around psychology for children as well. You might have heard the conversation that we had prior around emotional based school non-attendance and the high figures of that we're now seeing coming through, and we're hearing more and more of it, of children actually having severe anxiety, feeling physically sick, actually being physically sick, driving up to school, just not able to attend. I'm working with a group of parents who are dealing with this day and daily with their own pupils. Do you believe, and I know that there's been quoted, some academics have been quoted around that as well, and I know you're nodding as well. Do you believe that would attribute to these high figures of non-attendance that we're seeing?
I'm not sure of the transfer, but you'd have to say logically it should. I don't know what age range we're talking about here. I mean,
it seems to be just it seems to be starting younger, but it's.
But I think that there is a general finding among people in psychology that school has become more and more stressful, that life has become more and more stressful for young people, for children. The number of examinations that children are facing right across the UK and Ireland is, well, I'm talking UK figures here, is quite stark. And
that's why I feel, though, that the transfer test is part of the problem. I would say it is part of the cogwheel, if I'm honest, in terms of, the mental health issue. I mean, it's well documented, isn't it, that in Northern Ireland we are in a mental health crisis. So I think we need an education system that's part of the solution and not part of the problem, and I think there is something about maybe an overarching pressure, too much assessment. But I think to start at such a such a sensitive developmental age to inflict, that level of pressure, again, is definitely contributing to. I'm not surprised, if I'm honest, to hear that that's happening.
Could I make a quick comment on that? In my granddaughter's, when my granddaughter was in P6, when they were preparing for the transfer test, there was a wee boy in her class, and the kids all loved him. He was on the autistic spectrum, and at the time he was pretty much non-verbal. And there was a lot of stress in the class on the children, test preparation, practice papers, all the things that happen, and all the pressure. I used to think that it was only the children who did the test that suffered from the stress. But one day this little boy's mum said to me, she said, I'm not going to say his name in case anyway, the mum said to me, and she said, he can't handle the stress anymore in the class. He can't handle the stress. She actually had to take him out of the school for a period of time because he couldn't handle the stress, because what was happening in the class, the stress of the children that were doing the test transferred to the children that weren't doing the test, transferred to a wee boy who was non-verbal. And his mum said to me, he can't take the stress anymore, and she had to take him out. I would not subject any child to that type of... And I totally... They use the term again and again, child abuse, but for me that's what it is.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Kathy. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your passion and compassion when you're speaking of this topic. I also want to thank you, John, for being very clear on the difference between an integrated school and a mixed school. I think it's evident. Others struggle with it, but the intentionality in particular is worth underscoring. There is a difference. It's an intended difference. I'm just going to ask you one question here because we're under time. Anytime you raise that we have an objection to academic selection, the answer we get back is, well, what would you replace it with? So what would you replace it with?
A comprehensive system whereby all the children are in the same class in primary school, that they all go to the same local school. Hopefully they can walk to it. Cuts down all the transport to all the various different schools. So a comprehensive system is what I'd be in favour of.
Is it?
Right.
Sorry, it's Michelle. Yes, sorry. I'm going to just read a wee piece here from the author, journalist and lifelong campaigner for comprehensive education, Fiona Miller. And this is what she had to say, and it's very, very clear. Polling suggests that most parents have a pretty uniform idea of the school they want to choose. It is local, it has good teaching, good discipline, a balanced intake, strong leadership, good facilities, and decent exam results. And that's the type of local school we would like to have in all our communities.
Just one quick follow-up. If you've got a lot of evidence for why academic selection is bad and the negative impacts it have, who would be negatively impacted if we removed it?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Who would be negatively impacted by removing?
I don't think anybody would be negatively impacted. No.
I think beneficial to everybody. Children are...
And there'd be no more of this tutoring. There'd be no more stress on the parents. There'd be no more stress on the teachers. And that would be a big win straight away.
I think it's also true that if you have a balanced intake, that actually the able pupils or the pupils maybe from middle class background who are advantaged socially actually have the effect of bringing up the children who come from deprived backgrounds. The disaster is what happens in our secondary schools, where all the middle class or perhaps more able children have been creamed off by the grammar schools, and the secondary schools are left with a totally unbalanced intake of a vast mass of children who have got multiple problems.
And can I say as well that the comprehensive, most of the schools in England are comprehensive. In Scotland, there's non-selection in their schools, but the comprehensive schools in England do at least as well as grammar schools in England, so which are selective in certain areas, Kent and one or two other areas. So there's no real losers.
Yes, it's interesting that in England, attempts have been made, principally by the Conservative Party, or elements within the Conservative Party, to bring back grammar schools, but they've actually failed because there's no public demand to bring them back. And there are surviving counties which still have grammar schools, but they're very much outliers. And I mean, effectively, for the guts of 30 years, comprehensives have been the main form of education in England. And really the outlier within the British Isles now is Northern Ireland.
James, did James want to come in there if you had your hand up?
I'm okay, actually, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to comment on that, and this is where I think evidence is really important, and this being led by the data and the evidence is so important, because we have a narrative that's emerging that we're starting to fall behind in our results, England, and that's a big agenda behind the Transform Ed, and there are certain arguments that are marshalled to say why that might be the case, and interventions are put in place, but it feels like the transfer test can never be considered as one of the elements in the mix, and that to me seems a real failure in policy making. Just to refuse to consider it. It will never be on the table. So we'll find solutions to all these other things that might be driving it, which could be in the mix, but we don't look at this one, at what takes place at age 11. And I think that's come through really clearly today, that this is just an elephant in the room that seemingly policymakers in education don't want to engage with. I'll bring Gary in.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you all. Found it very interesting so far. I would class myself as a Presbyterian. I'm probably not a radical one, but I very much enjoyed your contribution. I do declare I did do the 11 plus and I failed mine. Obviously no reflection on the fact that I'm here as a politician. But that being said, I find that the 11 plus, it certainly, I think a lot of it is around the framing as well, in terms of how these tests are framed, certainly whether they're life or death or whether it's a grade on a page. Certainly from my perspective, what I've seen it as an opportunity to go on and to try and improve. So I didn't have the mental health challenges. That being said, it is evident that there are those who clearly do, so I'm not disputing that particular evidence. In terms of that emotional well-being, so in terms of that balance, so of course, throughout life, there's going to be, academic, there's going to be challenge, there's going to have to be examinations, etc. So in terms of the differentiation seems to be around, at what age that should be, as opposed to, doing away with altogether. So how do you propose that balance? Because Anne, you talked there about sort of, if you do away with it, well, it would take away the stress of parents who take away. But the reality is, I'm a parent and I have a child at 8 years of age in school, and I feel that stress, and he's not doing any examination. So there's clearly wider pressures, and are we putting it all onto the academic selection?
Stress is a part of all our lives, and it's quite normal to feel stressed at times, but it's when it becomes distress that's when it's becoming serious. And for your child, if your child is approaching P7 and P6 and coming up to the exam, and is not allowed to sit the exam because they don't feel that the school doesn't feel he's going to get it or she is going to get it, so they don't want to affect their overall scores. That's one scenario. Or they want to do the exam, I think like somebody you mentioned earlier, who wants to do the exam because everybody else is doing this, or because they don't want to, their parents don't want them to sit colouring in or whatever. And time wasting. There's also the children, I want to say, who the exam's over in November. This is now November again. The examination process will be over. Then after that, whenever the exam's done, the curriculum becomes less important. So the whole curriculum is affected. But does anybody else want to come in?
In terms of the issue, so there's the curriculum issue, so we could argue in terms of the form of the curriculum to make sure that doesn't, so there's a better balance between. Yeah. But I suppose in terms of, going forward, that balancing, I suppose, the well-being and, I suppose, preparing our children, for, I suppose, a life of challenges.
We shouldn't have to, I mean, children do need a certain amount of resilience. There's absolutely no doubt, because there's stress, as Anne says, in all our lives. The problem is, you're only 10 years of age. You're only a child. And you shouldn't at that, because I just don't think any 10-year-old is mature enough to have to face the stress of this particular test at this particular time. And it just all becomes too much. And I think, as Anne said earlier, and I had a lot of correspondence a number of years ago with an academic, and I'm going to try to go through it quickly, Richard Kallenberg. And he was known at the time, he was a researcher for the Century Foundation in America, and he was known as the godfather of socio-economic integration. And a lot of the stuff I got from him was based on a report way back in 1966 called the Coleman Report. But it simply said that the best predictor of how well a child would do at school is their background, their socio-economic, their family, where they're coming from. But the second most important indicator was who they go to school with, who they sit in the classroom with. The problem we have here, we have in our secondary schools 39% free school meals. That's your average. Some schools is well over 50. And when you have that, those concentrations of poverty all in one school, it pulls everything down. And as John says, it's really like when you have a better mix, and when you have better kids in the school, it's better for everybody. And even for the more advantaged kids, it's better, because helping other children and teaching other children in a way and supporting them also helps yourself.
And
so
just to going back to your point, then the children who don't pass and go to the secondary schools, teachers will report very frequently that they have to spend the first term or maybe longer trying to build up the self-esteem of those children.
That's certainly been my experience, And I think maybe what you're trying to say
too. Just draw this as a
is
final comment, just to draw this one to an end.
Parents need to maybe take a more balanced approach, kind of be a bit more chilled, or not.
No. I think that I wouldn't blame the parents in a sense. I suppose it's a societal issue in terms of the framing of it.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that there are people out there who say that if you do not pass it, you're a failure. That is wrong. The
test in itself conveys that message. Nobody needs to tell them. I just think it is developmentally inappropriate pressure for too young an age. Just to me, it's black and white. I don't see it as a grey area. It's just too young to put children through such a high stakes and you can't even repeat it. As I've said before, it's not even an exam you can repeat.
That's grand. Thank you, Gary. Donna, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, thank you so much. So just following on from that there, I failed my 11+, and I felt like a failure for a very, very long time. And it was just my love of art, that you got a grade and then it snowballs, and then you somehow I managed to get enough to move on and do my A-levels. And I was very privileged to be the Mayor of Belfast, and I remember doing a wee post, and it flew, and it was about children getting their results and how they would feel, and I just expressed how I felt, and look at me, I got to be the Mayor of Belfast. And a parent reached out to me and says, look, my child's failed and won't leave the house, won't leave the room. So that young lad, I invited him into the parlour and just give him my experience. And I got a lovely message just not too long ago to say that he had passed all of his GCSEs and absolutely flying. So look, it is such a damning thing to have at 11 years of age.
Yes.
And we're not very good at listening to the evidence in this place, because we also have a system that condemns children at the criminal age responsibility at 11. That's where we're at. So we have a minister right now who really believes that this is a tired old debate. So I suppose my question is, who really does benefit from the transfer test for academic selection? Because someone benefits for this to be ignored, because all the evidence says differently, no matter where you look in the world. And then we also have a minister who's, in my opinion, bringing forward changes to the curriculum, removing AAS, removing coursework, creating another high-stakes exam at the end of your time, that if you were to fail that, you're going off a cliff. So you picking up any of those concerns without hearing from principals that they're being overwhelmed with consultations and surveys to make sure that this regressive curriculum is going to go through?
I mean, I can answer your question about who benefits. Can't remember the name, but it's the private company that administers the test. There's a big shortfall in public health provision here, and scooping up the profits, laughing all the way to the bank, are the private health providers. That's the same in education. It's not a good situation.
Yeah. You asked the question, who actually benefits? I remember when my oldest son, who got the 11 plus, and this is, I'm talking now, nearly 40 years ago, right? And he got into BRA. And I remember going to the first parents' night, and the principal, a very nice guy called Mr. Sillery, he said, you should be very proud to have your children starting at BRA. Do you realise that you're getting an education for your child here that would cost £5,000 on the mainland, and you're getting it for free?
That was 40 years ago.
There's your answer of who benefits. Who benefits is the middle class, and the people who expect their children to get through the 11 plus, unless there's some class of disaster along the way. But enough of them have that expectation to be supportive of the 11 plus. Now, what I find extraordinary is that representatives of largely working class communities and deprived communities believe that their constituents are in some mysterious way advantaged by the 11 plus.
It would just be then the models out there, the countries that we should be looking at for the evidence. If you're just going to be a bit of detail at who should we be looking at?
Canada.
Yep.
Finland,
yeah.
Belgium.
And see, just to go back on the curriculum change side of it, because I do know that there was a number of conferences quite recently where the minister was pushing his Transform Ed, and one of the countries that was being championed was Singapore. Would you have any sort of thing within Singapore to think?
One for Jim.
Singapore, Jim.
All I would say is I read a number of years ago, it was 2016 when the book was first published, Cleverlands. It's quite an amazing book, and I read it when it was first published, and I gave a copy to a friend who was involved in teacher training, and I think it's a book that should be in all teacher training institutions and university education departments. It's quite an amazing book, and it really is. So, my problem with the likes of, and she does there's a section on Singapore. My problem with some of the focus that the minister has on educational systems is he tends to focus on systems that are very like this system, that are very elitist. And for me, that is hugely problematic.
So what about Singapore?
Well, Singapore, quite elitist as well. But what I would say to you is this.
Just a brief.
I'll make it very brief. There are 5, I'm not going to go through them because I obviously wouldn't have time, but in the book, Lucy Curran has 5 principles for high-performing, equitable systems. She's got 5 principles, and those principles are really, really worth looking at. And none of those principles involves selection. None of those principles involves segregation What she's talking about is children being educated together, children feeling valued, and none of this idea of winners and losers. And of course, if you have winners and losers, the losers generally are the disadvantaged people, and the winners are the people up there. And we've seen it again and again and again, and it just all gets too much.
Thank you, Jim. So just before I bring Curran, just in terms of the record, I think it's important to note, certainly in terms of CAG's published material, they state that they're not a not-for-profit company, so I do think it's important. That's certainly the material that they have on their website, so I think just in their interest of balance, important to put that on the record. Cara, I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the panel. You can really tell your passion and your insights on this topic. I come at this from a bit of a different lens. In the year of P6, my parents moved me to America, and then I was back in time, sadly, to sit the transfer test, and I felt immense pressure over those 2 summer months to get tutored and to get brushed up on the 11 plus, and I got a B1. And you highlighted the important point that it's very strange that there's no opportunity to repeat, and that always sat with me of, oh, what could I have got if I had a little more time or had another opportunity. Recently, when I've spoken with parents whose children aren't sitting a test, they have said that their children and those who are sitting the test, they can feel the difference in each other. Over the summer months, they'll get all these different tests and preparation, but their child is left to sort of feel quote unquote stupid with no work given to them. And I think a lot of the conversation today really rightfully has focused on the health and well-being of our primary school children, and it's been so sad to see Happy Healthy Minds removed. Do you think we're highlighting enough as a committee, as elected representatives, and I suppose the wider department itself, we're doing enough to talk about the mental health impact of the transfer test?
No, I don't think we are doing enough to highlight that. I mean, there's lots of statistics about how damaging to mental health the 11 plus the transfer system is. For example, teachers will report that 90% of teachers are reported as saying that the transfer system has a very negative impact. Children suffer from anxieties, sleepless nights, depression coming up to, and I mean the whole business of doing those tests over the summer months, when personally as a psychologist I was against homework for in general in primary schools, never mind the increased homework that's related to the transfer. Education psychologists at the minute are experiencing a spike in referrals of primary 6 pupils where parents maybe are looking for some sort of evidence that their child needs extra time or extra assistance to sit the transfer, or maybe not to automatically get into the grammar school. So there is a lot of evidence there to say that the transfer system does have a detrimental effect, and if we collect that all together, that would be useful for the committee.
I definitely am picking up from parents. It's sort of the first time that their children feel less than their friends in the class, and it's just, I think it's just not right. And we really hear the level of stress coming from our young people at that primary school age. So no, that answers my question. And again, this has been such an engaging panel and really fascinating to listen to you all. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. And then we just have John to come in.
So you ready for me, Chair?
Yes, John. Your floor is yours.
Yeah, I just said at the outset, I think spending 20 minutes discussing matters in the Middle East when there's so many pressing issues in Northern Ireland, and that cuts back on our ability to speak to the witnesses, is not ideal. But that's my view. I noticed a number of grammar schools were mentioned. I just hope they get a right to reply to some of the things that were said. And I also want to challenge one aspect of language. I don't accept that selection, whatever our views on it, amounts to child abuse. I think that phrase was used, and I just think that's inappropriate in my view. But moving on, a couple of questions just on selection. Let me just bring up my pack. One of the core values in Enlightenment is actually individual autonomy. So I'm conscious to get the witnesses' views on why, and just pick my own constituency, why a young girl in my constituency, where we have very, very good grammar schools and non-grammar schools, if she wants to go to either Dalriada School or St. Louis School, and if that's where her family and she believes she's going to thrive, why should she not have that choice?
Can I just come back to your initial point?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure individual autonomy is core value of the Enlightenment, as you're saying. I think a core value Enlightenment, as espoused by the likes of Edmund Burke, is community. And I think another core value.
I think part of a community is individual autonomy.
Another, sorry?
And would individual autonomy not be part of a community, or does it have to be a one-size-fits-all?
Yes, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and sometimes the whole is greater than the parts. Another core value Enlightenment promulgated by John Locke is the fact that there is no such thing as innate ideas, and that every child when born is a tabula rasa, and it's not what's in them at the start, but what you do with them and how you encourage them that can make them the person, the adult that they become. So academic selection is based on the principle that ability 11 is pretty much fixed, and that's it. That's wrong, and we've known that since the Enlightenment. So that's all I have to say. I'm sure one of my colleagues can answer your other questions.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, you're bringing it in.
Could I say something just there to John? The whole foundation of the transfer test is based on a fraud. The chief architect of the transfer test back in 1944, when the Education Act was first passed by Churchill's wartime government, was a man called Sir Cyril Burt, and he was an educational psychologist. He was also the government chief statistician. But Burt believed that intelligence was fixed, that it was innate, and that it could be measured. And a lot of his research, identical twins separated at birth, and that research was used as a basis for this selection at 11, this 11 plus. And when he died in 1971, they started looking at his research. And what they found is, it was, to be quite honest, and I don't think this is really disputed, it was fraudulent. A man called Dr. Oliver Gilly, who was a medical correspondent for the Sunday Times, went and tried to track research assistants that he had mentioned in his research papers. A lady called Margaret Hard and another lady called Jane Conway. These were two of Sir Cyril Burt's assistants. They were fictitious names. Oliver Gilly, he couldn't trace them, and they just didn't exist. And there was a big splash sometime in October 1976 in the Sunday Times about the fraud, basically, that had been committed by Sir Cyril Burt. So the whole premise, the whole basis of the transfer test is really based on fraud.
Okay. Well, I mean, my view is I thought it was a fairly accepted fact that individualism was a core component and principle of the Enlightenment, but
I suppose I come back to that and I'd say it's a distortion. It's a modern neoliberal distortion of Enlightenment values.
Okay. Certainly, I value individualism and diversity. I'm going to ask just another question. I mean, Finland decided, but Finland, the average post-primary class size is 19. Northern Ireland, we have a legal maximum of 35. Many schools are at that. And Finland also allocates a lot more public funding to education. So is it not a misleading comparison? We start comparing, apples and pears in different countries, and it doesn't actually help us in making decisions around selection in Northern Ireland.
If I could just maybe one panel member to take it and to try and answer it briefly, just as we are pressed for time.
Can I say that Pazzi Schalberg, he at one time Finnish education minister and author of Finnish lessons, what he said was this: you cannot borrow somebody else's dream for your education system. You have to have your own dream, and you have to realise your own dream. And I think that's what we have to do.
Well, look, I just say I'm particularly keen to support all my grammar schools, all my non-grammar schools, and the various different schools in North Antrim, and particularly, I have to say, Catholic grammars, who I think do an outstanding job. And I've seen that around the country. So I want to put on record, thank you for your evidence, and it was very interesting. And I do want to make sure that grammar schools feel valued, because they also do a tremendously important job, and we should be proud of the high academic achievement that they bring to Northern Ireland.
Thank you, John. So I think important to know, I don't think anybody is wanting to do down any particular schools, and we all want our young people to succeed, but I'm certainly keen for the committee to listen to the evidence and where the data leads us in terms of what the impact of academic selection is. This is, for me, very clearly not about bashing schools or sectors. It's about, if we're going to reflect seriously about our education system, well, as Jim has alluded to there, I think that reference to you have to have your own dream, and I think before we start dreaming we need to look at the data and what does it tell us. So I would be keen to see if the committee can do some more with this, but time is regrettably against us, so I want to thank you all for your time and for the really interesting evidence you brought us today, and I think it does leave the committee with some questions around where we go next in terms of the evidence we need to hear on this, and we thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for receiving us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
just while the witnesses are...
If anyone wants copies of this.
Yes, please. Very much appreciated. Yeah. So, while the witnesses are just making their way out, I think we'll probably move to a very quick comfort break, and then I would just be asking before we do that to hear from members if there are any actions arising from that briefing that we would like to follow up. For me, I think there are some questions for officials when we come to particularly the Transform Ed agenda, because that's been one that's been very, very clear that the issue of academic selection was not going to be considered in the mix at all as a factor that needs to be looked at around what are the drivers for either success or decline in the success of our education system. So I would be certainly just content to note that, to bank it for that evidence session, but I would want to suggest in the new year that this may be an issue the committee wants to pick up. We're clearly very pressed in terms of our agenda between now and Christmas, but I would like to certainly put on record that I think there is more evidence. I think there's more expert evidence to be heard, and I think there is a space to hear from the department as to, well, what data do they hold on the impact of this and the outcomes that it actually leads to. I don't think it's good enough anymore to say where there's no consensus there can be no discussion, because that to me does not seem like good policy making. But I'll bring in other members if they want to briefly. David.
It's not so much. I think the argument hasn't been that, you know, where there's no consent there can be no discussion. I think the argument is whenever you consider the legion of crisis we have across our education system and the issues that we need resource to try and fix and think, and there are those issues to deal with that really need to be given priority. It's whether we wish to spend time on an issue that is very unlikely to end with an outcome that of change. I mean, this has been a divisive issue long before my time or your time here. I don't know whether it was before or after Pat's arrival, but I accept there are different views around the table on this. And I accept that there will be times whenever we want to discuss and look at evidence and so on. But I think what the Minister is trying to say, and I would wholeheartedly agree with him, is that whenever we have the scale of issues facing us that we do, how much time do we want to spend on something that the outcome of the end game of will likely end with the same situation that we have now, where it's not the perfect situation that I would want in how the transfer test sits at the moment. I suspect it's definitely not where you want to be either, but we will probably sit with that imperfect situation for time to come.
And I would certainly want to see maybe a bit more ambition, that we can take an issue and grapple with it and see where we can deliver some change. But Deputy Chair,
just on that, David and I'll disagree, and that's fair enough. We'll disagree on different issues. What I would like to see is the empirical and scientific evidence, that we sit down, look at it, analyse it, and decide where the problem is. And David talks about, other priorities in the education system. There are many educationalists and academics who will point to academic selection as the major fault line. in our education system. In fact, the ESRI report that I mentioned earlier flagged up academic selection as one of the major fault lines. So, you know, if we keep focusing on other issues, I think we're building on very flimsy foundations. The elephant in the room is academic selection, and at some stage, unionism needs to face up to that fact. That would be my view, anyway.
Well, I don't think there's any actions arising at this stage. I really would encourage members to reflect on the briefing today in terms of how we deal with the future briefings from officials on some of these more transformational structural reform type approaches that are being taken, and just where this issue might sit. But we can pick that up, and I'll be seeking to pick this up again for forward work planning in the new year. So I'm going to offer out a comfort break if we want to just turn the live feed off, and then we'll come straight back into item 7. And I just want to emphasise to members we really do need to work together on time here. So we can do that. Okay, members, that is us back into open session of committee. So we're moving on to item 7 on the agenda, if we could bring witnesses through. So that is feeding into our strategic review into the current SEN provision in Northern Ireland, and we have a briefing today with Education Authority officials. So refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 177, an Education Authority briefing paper at 179, and I would also draw members' attention to their tabled papers where a press release from the EA which has some specific references around transport spending which may be relevant for our discussion today. So first of all, you're very welcome today, and apologies for the delay. I don't know if you've ever presented to committee and have not had to apologise for the delay in your evidence session starting. We had a lot going on at the start of our agenda, so apologies for that. You are very welcome. I'll just introduce who we have here today. If anybody wants to add anything to that, please feel free. We have Hanna from the EA Chief Operations Officer. We have Tomas Adell, Chief Transformation Officer, and Robbie McGreevy, Chief People Officer. So you're all very welcome, and thank you for your time. Probably don't need any major preamble here. Your briefing paper was comprehensive, but happy to hand over for any initial opening remarks that you want to make, and then we'll move into question and answer from there. So look, it's over to yourselves.
Look, thanks, Chair. And I think probably we didn't want to go into lots of detail in the paper, but given the fact that there was an announcement today in the savings, I thought we just wanted to very quickly touch on that, just to give committee a sense. Look, as the statement emphasised, that this is not a position that EA wanted to be in. And look, we find it difficult ourselves being in that position, making that announcement. We know the education sector is living with the consequences of years of increasingly unmanageable funding shortfalls, and the warning about this year's budget that were made publicly by the department and others are sadly being borne out by events. Today's announcement has followed some really difficult and deliberate deliberations, and we have had a special meeting of the board in September around those. We've also engaged widely with the department around the detail of that. We will obviously be engaging with stakeholders and making further communication and announcements on specific savings in the coming weeks. We know the committee will want more detail on that, and I know that EA officers will be more than content to come back and discuss the detail of that. I suppose the other thing, again, given that we've been here before around SEN and the placements, I just wanted to give a very brief update on that. You know that the last time there was an update, or there was a letter from, an open letter from NITC, and we said that we were going to respond to that positively. It's just to make you aware that we've started engagement sessions with principals this week. I had one yesterday, we have sessions tomorrow and Friday, and 2 more sessions with principals. So look, we're starting that work now, and again, hopefully in the coming weeks we'll be able to come back and update you on the outworkings of that as well. But I thought that was important to add that as well.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we'll move into questions then. If members want to just indicate through the clerk for anyone who wants to come in, I'll make a start. So obviously we have the press release, and just for any members who haven't seen it, it is in your tabled papers and it's under item 7 there, just if they do want to refer to that. Plan here was to come and to discuss the sort of the issues, the wider operational issues around the SEN inquiry, and I hope we do get to those because that's important. But I think just in terms of that announcement specifically as it pertained to the issues around potential impact on transport provision. So I suppose I really just wanted to get a sense of what are the changes that are being proposed? Because the statement doesn't have a lot of detail, and already from the point that statement was released to come into this room, I've had substantial contact from parents saying, well, what does this mean for me? This is happening imminently, it seems, and they don't understand what it means. So can you help get us a sense of what changes are coming down the track here, and it seems quite soon, and what reassurances can you offer parents about the services that they currently receive before we broaden it out beyond?
Okay, so I suppose specifically in transport, I think that's twofold really. One is taxis, I'll come to that in a minute. There's also a range of arrangements that we have in place that are out with the current transport policy, and it's about looking at those and considering those and working through the detail of those. Obviously, I can't go into the detail of that now, because what we want to do is to be able to finalise and make communication directly with the parents on that, of those that may be affected with that. In terms of the taxis, and this, I mean, it's interesting because I know some of the conversation today might be about taxis. Taxi costs have gone up have doubled over the last 5 years, and we're sitting at about 30 million. Now, some of that has been driven by the increase in SEN, quite rightly, because there's more children that require SEN transport. But I think what I would say is, I'm starting to look at that and analyse that. We certainly seem to be operating in an environment where, to some extent, the activity is monopolised by a small number of operators across the province. And one of the things that we want to do is to look at how we can break that down, how we can do that differently. So we will be finalising plans over the next number of weeks to be engaging with those operators to see how we make savings.
I just stop you there, because I think those questions will come, and it's absolutely right. We should look at the broader stuff. I suppose I am conscious there will be parents watching this now, just who have seen that release, and they will be incredibly concerned, because a service that they rely on and that they require, they may read that as it's being taken away from them. So it's just to get a sense of, can you give us any idea in terms of what this actually means? Just, there will be savings or changes to taxi provision, leaves people with a lot of uncertainty. So it's just to try and get to a little bit of clarity of what we're talking about here.
Look, I have to be really honest. I can't give absolute assurances on every single taxi service, but clearly, like I said, I believe we're operating in a monopolised environment, and we really need to work hard with our operators. Now, I hope that we can work with our operators to find a negotiated position where we can get to a price point that is reasonable for what the market delivers. And if that is the case, then I would imagine that in the vast majority of services, those services will continue to operate in the way that they're operating for parents now. However, if we find ourselves in a very difficult position with some of our operators, then look, that may mean that we need to look at alternative ways, either potentially looking to cancel contracts, change contracts, re-tender, which may mean a change of provider. In some circumstances, it may mean that we have to look at parental payments, which is something that we already do now. But I think our position is very clear, Chair, that the costs that the EA are bearing in terms of taxi costs is unreasonable. Some of it is I'm going to use the word extortionate. And we need our colleagues that work in the taxi industry to realise that they need to move away from that position. Otherwise, it's going to be a long-term unsustainable position.
So again, I know that there is a wider discussion to be had on this, and this has been something that we've covered in committee regularly. The committee has watched that increase, that it is rising year on year, and concerns have been registered, and I have no doubt that will be discussed today. But if for a parent who is expecting that service to be available on Monday morning, can you offer any assurances that won't be taken away? Because that's the question. I mean, I can only respond to the questions I'm receiving today, which is what's happening to my service.
Parents will not see any change in the next number of days. Any change that will happen will be communicated on a timely basis, with parents to give notice either that it's changing or it's going to be different. We're at the start now of planning about how we communicate with taxi operators. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight, Chair. We wouldn't do that. We will be communicating, but we will be acting quickly to try and effect as many savings as we can across the rest of the remainder of the financial year. I would be confident in saying that I would expect to see most of the changes take effect from the start of the next school term, starting at the start of January. That is a sort of loose timeline well, loose isn't the right word, but that would be the indicative timeline in terms of what we're working to and what we want to do to work with the taxi industry to try and resolve.
Can I get an assurance from you, Dale, that you will keep the committee updated on this in terms of as soon as this actually is crystallising into what operational reality looks like, that we will hear? Because I have no doubt on the back of this committee session every member around this table will be receiving contact, because I'm not this even the evidence we've heard so far will have caused a substantial anxiety, and I don't like scaremongering, and I don't want to. I'm just responding to what I'm hearing, even in that window of time from the release.
And look, I don't want to scaremonger, and we recognise there is huge impact with some of the decisions that we've had to take as an organisation, but unfortunately they're the limited areas where we can take decisions in terms of making savings. So look, we will work at pace with colleagues across our providers to try and identify and get the savings that we need to get, but also try and minimise the impact on service users. But we will try to do that quickly, but we will also try to do it in a way where there's reasonable notice to parents should things need to change.
Well, other members may want to pick some of that stuff up. On the broader stuff then around taxi, because I think it is appropriate we have the conversation. The impression that I have, certainly from sitting on from the elected rep side, is that it is a pretty ineffective service. The costs seem to go up year on year, and I think we're into exponential sort of territory. But the service users I engage with, parents, while they value the service, they don't necessarily have great confidence in it. There seems to be real issues around just the reliability of provision, and just the year in, year out uncertainty around what provision will look like, and we're all familiar with some of the issues of inappropriate provision being put in place. So costs are clearly a huge issue. What can you do to not just bring costs down, but to actually make this a service that is efficient for parents? And I'm thinking specifically around saying transport here. So how do we make this better? Because I think we've got the worst of all scenarios here, in that costs are rising, but parents don't see with that increased cost that the service is any better.
I think for me, Chair, I'm probably going to say something that I've said at committee before, that this is by extension, I suppose, an outworking of where we are in terms of trying to place children, and the difficulty that we're facing in terms of the broader capacity across the system and not having certainty there. So we're saying transport is ultimately the very last piece of the jigsaw in terms of what we do for those parents. So right up until the point a young person is placed, until we know that, then the transport service, the transport teams aren't in a position to determine how they would allocate that transport to that individual. And quite often I think for the parents, it's a sense of they've had that fight to finally get themselves a place into the school, and then they find themselves with us saying to them, well, look, it's going to take another week to get the taxi in, or the transport in place. We still need to go through processes, best practice, and some of the things today are about vetting, for example. We need to make sure that when we put a contracted provision in place, that those taxi drivers and the escorts are vetted. So until we know where the child is placed, we're not necessarily in a position to be able to allocate that particular pupil to a particular run or a particular service. So I understand how that feels for those children that have been placed at the very last piece of that. So it goes back to that. I think more broadly, because taxis are a contracted service, we are expected to comply with public procurement rules. So there will always be a rhythm in terms of the going out to tender, and that changes on a regular basis. And I know certainly in my experience, parents would be they would really value having, say, a named driver for, say, 14 years or 15 years. That's just not something that we can do. So for me, the thing is getting some certainty into the system around the placements. I think the second bit of that is the capacity of the taxi market. So in the last 5 to 6 years, the number of taxi operators has reduced by 50%. That is also creating a huge pressure on our ability to be able to tender work to the market, which is also creating the pressure on prices, because to some extent the taxi operators understand that there's a limited supply of them, there's a huge demand, and that in some ways the pricing of that is easier for them to put in prices that we wouldn't normally accept.
Or just maybe there's a couple of things flowing from that. So you've mentioned placements, and actually linking back even to the briefing we've just heard, the evidence session we've just had, and there was a big focus on that around educating children locally, children being educated in their own local communities. Now that goes all sorts of directions at post-primary level, and that's a whole other conversation, but particularly at primary level, the norm is for most children that they tend to go to a school in a pretty tight radius to their home. But when you bring SEN into the mix, for SEN children, that is often not the case. They are, bused or taxied to locations far away. I mean, I can think of an own example in my own constituency of a child in Newton Ards, who drives the whole way down the Ards Peninsula to go to a specialist preventive vision in Portferry. And I know that is not what that child's parents want. They value the provision, but they absolutely don't value that, hour-long journey every day to get to school. So is there something else in this in terms of bringing the costs down that is also of benefit to parents, that if we can actually place children nearer their own homes, around their peers that they live with in their communities, in the right place? Is that, I mean, how far away are we from getting to there? Not just about finding the right number of places, but those places in the right place.
I mean, that is still a piece of work that we're working with, and we need our schools to come on board and to provide that provision. And I think we've talked about it. It's nearly like if we get that domino kicked over in the right way, then those schools will be the schools that those children will go to, and by extension then we don't need to transport children. I mean, we're transporting some children, either long distances and or a combination. They could be in a vehicle quite a long time, even though they might be travelling a relatively short distance, just because of the being in an urban area. So I absolutely agree with that. It is critical that we get the right place in the right place, and that'll absolutely have an impact. That is also the factor. We now have a disaggregated, fragmented school transport system, where at one time we had probably a robust system. So many children went to X amount of special schools. There were less children that were attending, specialist settings or specialist units within schools. So the taxi and transport network was robust and was built around that. But increasingly, we've had to respond to the issue, the emerging issues around placements, and place children in schools where we wouldn't normally do that. And in reality, the only way to respond to that from the transport perspective is to provide a taxi.
Final question for me, because we are pushed for time and I want to make sure other members do come in. I want to just move on to that workforce piece that is also in your briefing. It's a really important part of what we're looking at, and particularly around the issue of how the education system interacts with the health system to ensure that those additional workers that are needed to provide those specialist health inputs are available to the system. But from the brief, it states that really, my summary, no overarching policy, framework or agreements on how such services should be achieved, resulting in a disparity of provision across trust area with differential outcomes for children and young people. I feel like we've been hearing that for a long time, and I am conscious that some of this sits at departmental level, so I do want to acknowledge that. But how long can we go on in the system when we're trying to talk about what workforce we need to put the right inputs into our system for children with special educational needs, where there is no overarching policy, framework or agreement on how health interact in that system? Surely that can't continue, and what can we do to improve that situation?
So you're absolutely right that it's not a position that is tenable. A lot of discussion about overarching policy framework has to be between the departments and departmental officials and others. What we are doing though is actively working with the health services to find solutions, local solutions, to provide the services to children and young people. Not saying it's perfect, but there are good examples where things are going right. So for example, some special schools have sort of community nursing is based in special schools, so therefore access to nursing in the schools. That's one way to find the local solution to a problem of school nursing, for example. We have a lot of engagement in special schools with health services around speech and language and occupational therapy. We need to have more of that, of course, but there are local solutions to those problems. What we are doing corporately is trying to work with the Health Trust and with SPPG, so the commissioning body of health, to see how we can build on good practices that exist on local levels to roll them out across all trust areas. There's active engagement with the health service. There's something that's priority for us, but I can't give a timeline. I mean, I met with health officials 2 weeks ago, and I'm meeting again within the next 2 weeks. We're trying to find solutions, but there's no easy answers.
To be clear, you're operating at an operational level, where between the two departments there is no clear overarching policy framework, governance structure around this.
I can't answer that question. I mean, we're trying to find operational solutions to a very difficult, challenging context. I mean, there's obviously a lot of pressures both in health service and in the educational sector, and that is not making things easy. But we are trying to find solutions. So what we're trying, looking for the future. So the local impact teams, for example, as we're stabilising the new service change, we're looking at future phases. And future phasing would be to expand into health services, to include health services in those teams. That's a natural setting for some children. So that planning work is starting. We can't come back with the answers right now, but early new year we come back with thoughts on how things could look. But again, it requires workforce, requires cooperation, and it requires funding.
Well, look, I think perhaps something to pick up, and all of this obviously is evidence for the inquiry report, but I maintain there's a need to get the two relevant ministers in front of both health and education committees to try and bottom this out, because I just don't know how long really it's tenable to be in the situation where we don't have that at departmental level, that appropriate policy framework agreement on how we get the two departments to work together to deliver operational solutions. But that's maybe for discussion after the evidence session. I'll bring the Deputy Chair in if anybody else hasn't indicated yet through the clerk.
Thanks, Chair. The last time you were here, Dale, with Richard, I asked you about the two audit office reports and the PAC report, which said that the EA wasn't able to demonstrate value for money despite the hundreds of millions that were being poured into it. And I asked you, had the EA identified any efficiencies or wastage? And the answer was no. And now we see this letter today. There's issues around the taxi service, 50p increase in school meals, the music service, suspend referrals to Otis, and then some of the agency contracts and overtime payments. How come that's all happened within a couple of weeks? You hadn't a couple of weeks ago identified any wastage.
In terms of, I suppose, the language of wastage, I mean, those are efficiencies. Those are, if we take something like the school meals, we haven't put prices up of school meals since 2017, and during that period there's been inflationary pressures. The cost, the intervening costs have been gone up by about 35%, and we haven't. We've actively, as an organisation, tried to absorb as much of that as possible in terms of that. In terms of the music service, again, where that there's a cost to parents there. Again, the organisation has tried to absorb, has tried to find ways to mitigate that cost, but it has come to the point in terms of that.
And my issue is this. I mean, you wrote out on the 23rd of October the principles will take any and all possible actions to reduce expenditure. Even told them not to use their accumulated surpluses to hire substitute teachers. And I give you an example in here the last time you were in of a taxi goes to a school every day to take the food containers 50 yards across the playground. And I asked you how much it would cost a week, and you said, I think you said 120 quid a week. I've actually done some digging into it. It's 500 quid a week. The taxi driver brings the containers over to the specialist provision classes. He sits there with the meter running until the containers come back out again. And he does that 5 days a week. I also know that there are other taxi drivers who take children with special needs to school in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon. And they get 800 quid a week for doing that. And the taxi company they work for also gets a percentage. And it's at least 12.5% that goes to the taxi company. The driver himself gets 800 quid a week. And that's the only work he does all week. Now, see if you take the example of the taxi driver delivering the food containers. I could ask my 13-year-old daughter to come up with a solution to that. And I have no doubt she would. And it would cost less than 100 quid a week. Now, there's a clear case of wastage. And the schools know that, because it's the schools that are coming to us and telling us about this. And yet you're sending out letters to schools saying, oh, you all have to play your part. You can't spend your accumulated surplus. But they're sitting looking at wastage day in, day out. How do you marry those two things together?
Well, look, I suppose at the outset I'm going to disagree with you on the costs that you've just described. I mean, that particular circumstances, and I'm glad you've raised it because it will help provide some clarification around that. In those particular circumstances, that taxi run is costing £29 per day. And the background to that is, yes, that was a school, and again, this comes back to schools responding, but that school set up a SPIM. The normal catering model is the children go to the dining rooms in the schools, and our staff, we have an efficient catering service. Our staff are there. It's a really busy period when they serve the meals, and they do that. In that particular circumstance, the principal wants the children to be served in the classroom. So in order to make sure that we could do that, and the other thing is, transporting meals it'll require trolleys, it requires different type of equipment, we need to do health and safety risk assessments, but our staff are busy serving in the kitchen. It's not in their job descriptions to transport meals, neither is it in some of the school meals. No, I need to finish this point.
No, just hold on a second.
But Chair, I need to finish the point.
Listen, well, first of all, the information I got came from one of the governors in the school. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm saying to you, a child could come up with a solution to deal with the issue of moving food trolleys 50 yards across a school playground. And it wouldn't cost anywhere near the amount of money that's being paid.
So I'm going to, again...
Maybe I think to give the
but it's important because there's a value for money.
If I could maybe give you the opportunity to clarify the point of fact that you wanted to, and then to address the wider question, and then we'll have to move on to the next one.
So I agree, we will be able to come up with other solutions to that, but there will be a cost to that. So for example, in that case, and again we'll probably have to agree to disagree on the costs. The cost, as I understand it, is £29 per day. It's a contracted cost. There is no taxi fare sitting meter running on that. I'm clearly not aware of that. But to give you an example, a catering assistant, the cost of 1 hour of catering assistant time to the organisation is £26.55. So it's not that whatever the alternative solution is going to involve having to pay staff to do either additional duties or give them additional time. We will be working with trade unions to come up with a solution to amend job descriptions over the intervening time. But back to the point, we find ourselves in a position which was these children, the principal asked us, and actually some of the criticism we've had in the past in the committee is that we don't listen to schools. So this principal has asked that the children are served their meals in a classroom. We've agreed that in order to do that and respond to that quickly, we've put in place the taxi arrangement. I absolutely agree. If we're sitting here in 2 years' time and you're saying, Dale, you still have a taxi service in there, I would completely agree that we've not been doing our jobs properly. But I would also make the case it is still going to cost more money, because we're going to have to pay each staff some sort of additionality in order to transport the meals, be it 50 yards, 100 yards, whatever the distance is, there's still going to be an additional cost. So look, just for the record, if there's another school or different sets of circumstances where you think there's a taxi operator getting that sort of money for doing a school meals run, then I would want to know about it, because clearly I would agree with you in those circumstances that is not value for money. But as I understand it, and the information I have in terms of the case that you raised the last time, it's £29 per day. If I put in a catering assistant to do it for 1 hour, it's £26.55. I'm content that what we're doing at the minute does represent value for money in the current operating constraints that we have.
And what about the issue of taxi drivers taking kids to school who are getting 800 quid a week?
And again, I think at the outset, I'm agreeing with you. I believe that we have a monopolised situation where there's a small number of taxi operators across the province that are, overcharging. I will agree with you on that, and I will agree with the committee on that. There are some circumstances why we do that. Our model as well. Remember, some of the things is about vetting. It's about safeguarding. The way that we operate is we require a named driver. We require a named escort to be in that to be named before we will award a contract. That rules out some of the bigger operators because they work on a rank basis and they don't want to bid for the work with EA. Again, we have, over the last 5 years, we've got a 50% reduction in the number of licensed taxi operators. And yes, I believe they have seen an opportunity to charge the Education Authority too much for taxi work. And what I'm saying to you is, and what I said at the very outset, we are going to be actively engaging now to work hard to try and reduce that cost over the remaining financial year and into the next financial year.
Just one quick one on suspending further referrals to IOTAS. Does that mean there are kids who are being referred from their schools to IOTAS or by the EA to IOTAS?
So
and that's not going to happen anymore?
So my understanding that as we come into this time of the year that we would be using some community and voluntary service providers, but we believe that there's sufficient capacity within our own provision. So it's more a movement away from using the community and voluntary sector and maximising the capacity that we have within our own EA-operated centres. But again, I just know that at a high level.
Will every child or young person who needs a placement in IOTAS get a placement?
My understanding is that this is about not using the community and voluntary sector and that there is sufficient capacity. But again, we can come back with more detail around that. I'm personally not in a position to be able to answer that question because that relates to a different part of the organisation.
Yes, that's one we need to follow up with. Like there are a number of things arising from the press release that we need to follow up on, and we'll come to that at the end of the briefing. Kathy, you'd indicated next.
Thanks. Sure. I want to move on to the workforce aspect of it. Can you tell me how many job vacancies there currently are in the lit teams?
There are approximately 30 job vacancies. We're actively recruiting at the moment. And
are those all teacher grade roles, or are they any job role within lit?
Majority teacher grade roles.
Majority?
Yep.
You don't have a split?
Not on me, no.
But in total it's about 30?
It's about 30.
Okay.
So that's vacancies that have been vacant. That are existing posts, it's not new posts, so I just want to make it clear as well.
What, sorry?
It's not new posts, it's filling vacant posts become vacant.
These are posts that have become vacant. Is there new posts to be advertised as well?
We're not expanding the workforce, we're refilling the workforce, filling posts that become vacant for people who have left for various reasons. So it's not expanding, it's not increasing the size of the workforce from what it should be.
Okay, so you're just sort of filling the gaps that are there at the minute.
Yeah.
And have they been advertised and being actively recruited for at this minute?
They're being actively recruited. I'm not sure if the advertising is out yet. It will be advertised very shortly if it's not been advertised.
Okay, and when do you expect those posts to be filled?
It's as soon as there are processes allowed to be filled. We obviously hope that be quickly, but obviously we have to go through the normal HR processes to advertise, to make sure we have the right people interview and all those things.
Of course, yeah. Do you have any idea of how many staff will be out on sick leave at this moment in time?
Across the lit teams?
Yeah.
I don't have exact numbers. It's not a high percentage.
Not a high percentage?
Not a high percentage.
Okay. We've been told, and I'm sure actually you have probably seen it. Did you see the evidence session with the groups of Senkos? And did you have any takeaways from that? Have you actively done anything since that?
We're actively working with Senkos on a regular basis. There's been a number of training sessions with Senkos. We have recently created one-pagers of information for Senkos that's been shared.
Okay.
And it's been shared.
I don't think that what I took from that evidence session was that the Senkos needed training.
Training information about how the lit systems work, about how the systems work. We know the Senkos time pressures are high, and that is not something we can adjust at this point. But we are helping Senkos in the new processes that local Olympic teams have. That's the training sessions we're doing. And in general, they've been received very well. The number of negative comments we have around the lit teams have reduced quite significantly as Senkos are becoming more and more used to how the system works. And actually the feedback we're having from Senkos overall is that this is working in the right direction. There is an acceptance that there were teething problems in the beginning that we're starting to overcome. Okay. There is obviously a capacity issue in lit service that we can't meet the need of all the children who needs to be met. That's a known capacity problem, and that is not something we can overcome unless we have additional funding.
Can I just add in terms of listening to the Senkos, we have listened to them and been really, really compelling. I think I can add to, when we talk about the engagement with the principals around the placements, one of the things that we're actively looking at is how do we support schools, because we're listening and we know that the SPIMS, for example, and the creation of specialist provision puts pressure on the Sankos as well. So one of the things that we're actively looking at and have proposals that we're very close to finalising is that we would be building an additional Sanko time, Sanko release, where schools, make a decision to step up to the plate and take on a new provision. So look, Cathy, I think we are listening. It's not being ignored. We acknowledge the Sankos play a critical part in the system, both at lit level, but also at the specialist provision level. So we are listening, and actually we do have proposals to hopefully mitigate some of the pressures that's on them.
That's good, Dale. And I do, and you came out and spoke to Sankos, and I accept that. I'm glad to hear that there's proposals and it's not just providing training for Sankos. So that has cleared that up. I'm sure they'll be very keen to see what these proposals are going to be. Why are we being told from lit teams that children are not getting taught, they're not getting literacy support?
That question I can't answer because that is not what our evidence shows us. The number of one-to-one sessions with children is not reduced with LITs, rather they're increasing. So we're not seeing less children.
Can you give any indication as to why we would be told the complete opposite?
I mean, I'm going to be really honest. I mean, and I've said before, we have had some sets of staff that were unhappy about the movement from what were the traditional services provided by the legacy education and library boards and the transformation to implementing a local impact team and providing intervention services at a more holistic multi-service level.
Yes, and we've went over this before. So are you telling me that these literacy teachers are still teaching the exact same amount as they were prior to this?
No, I'm not saying you're asking the question why would some of them be saying. What I'm saying is there remains an element where there is resistance to the new model.
No, that's not the question I'm asking. I'm asking is, are literacy teachers still providing the same level of support one-to-one to these children? Because we are being told they're not.
On a service level, yes.
Final point, yeah.
I mean, I can't ask. I can't respond in individual teachers, of course, but on a service level, yes, same numbers.
Exactly the same teaching time, same support is being given to children.
There's no less one-to-one support in the LIT model than there is in the previous models. That is not what the LIT service is. LIT service providing the same support. Actually, our hope is it provides more direct one-to-one support because it's a more efficient model.
Okay, so, and just briefly, Chair, so we have been told that even if this LIT service was fully resourced, fully staffed, there's 30 vacancies at this minute in time, even if that is fully resourced, that this model is not fit for purpose. What would you say to that?
I would strongly refute that. I mean, this is a service where we're wrapping around the child, so we're looking at one referral point for a child, so we can provide the service required for one child, rather than having 8 referral points and 8 different services, so that they cannot meet the child's need. That's not siloed to one.
And I accept that, because when I sit and listen to that, I think that sounds very sensible. But we're also then listening to Sankos to say that's not the case.
So I obviously, I'm not a Sanko, I don't know their exact position. What I would imagine that their biggest challenge is that the children they want to refer in don't essentially meet our thresholds because we don't have enough capacity.
What is the criteria for children to receive one-to-one support? What is that criteria?
There's an assessed need in a moderation panel to see if the child...
What is the actual criteria? What do they have to hit to receive one-to-one support?
They need to be deemed by the assessment panel to be at a high enough need and placed high enough on the waiting list, quite frankly. If we had... I mean, the problem is the support services we've offered in LITs have remained more or less static for quite a period of time, a number of total staff. But the number of children at stage 2 are increasing. So the proportion of stage 2 children who can receive one-to-one LIT support is going down, not because the number of children in LIT service is going down, but because there's a higher number of children that could qualify for a LIT service. I would expect most Sankos to be very frustrated that the children they see as need that should be met at stage 2 that can't be met because of capacity limit.
So we're not meeting the needs of these children?
The service cannot meet the need the way we want to meet it because we don't have the capacity, because we don't have funding to provide the need. When we have a limited funding, we can only provide a limited service. That's.
Thomas, we hear report after report of the money not being well spent within the year.
I'm going to draw a line.
Can I appreciate, but I think I just want to remind members, we spoke about this before, and we talked about where we moved from we've moved from a discrepancy model, which actually focused on a certain core of children who had a particular IQ range, and they were the only children that could ever access literacy services. And what we've done is, through the model of the local impact teams, is take that particular discrepancy model and removed it and opened up access to all of our children to access literacy services. Now there's a
more children are getting support.
My point is,
I appreciate that there is a lot to this. I'm going to come in and draw a line under this, not because I think it doesn't warrant discussion. One, because we're up against it in time, and also because we do have a future evidence session scheduled specifically on LITs, where I think that will be our opportunity to really get into the detail on this. So it'll be a comment and we move on, because we're simply not going to get round everybody.
Can I offer to provide a written briefing to committee with numbers about LITs, so you have the numbers, so then we can show the evidence. Is that a?
Yes. Yeah, please, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle, you're next.
Thank you, folks. I have to say at the start, though, I'm really impressed with the briefing. I know I've been critical sometimes of the quality of the briefings we get through, but this is really, really good what you sent us, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Obviously, I'm already getting contact about the transport stuff from SEN parents, and one, I think this is a really fair point. She's like, why didn't I think of this before September? This is a massive disruption to our kids. Surely you knew things were bad before the summer, and I think that's a fair question when you've characterised today the costs as extortionate.
So I think it's twofold. I think previously, and I mean this year's different, in many of the past years, I think the financial position hasn't been as stark as it's been articulated to us now, and so there's been a real pressure that we need to make savings in year. So
if something was extortionate, we're not already looking at making those savings. We know the pressures are already there.
I mean, we were looking at those. We would have wanted to bring those in a more phased way and in a more planned way across school years. We wouldn't have wanted to do that initially. I mean, we also were looking at other ways of trying to mitigate costs by operating our fleet slightly differently, purchasing vehicles, and trying to offset those most expensive runs. I mean, the transport teams were starting to analyse the information that was available to them. They were starting to see, I mean, it's been an emerging issue in terms of the cost. So I suppose it's that point. We're at a point now where the straw that breaks the camel's back. And in terms of, we've both got savings to make right now, but also I've said to the teams we need to bring a real focus around this and start to look at those costs, because they just aren't sustainable, either in the current financial year or future financial years. And so we do want to do that bit of work, but I acknowledge the point you're making.
Thanks, Dale. I want to move on to nursing provision in our special schools. Something we've within the committee have had a bit of a focus on and a really big concern. So I'm just wondering what contact you have had with special schools in terms of their nursing provision and the threat to that.
I've spent quite a lot of time around special schools to speak about, and one of the things that I've been very intent to speak about nursing provisions. There's a clear understanding that we need to have a stable nursing provision. What that would look like, there's quite a lot of different thoughts and options. I think the universal view is that we need to have school nursing in shapes and forms in special schools, but not that all special schools require school nursing at all times. And that's the view from principle in special schools. It's about finding the right balance between those things and how we can have the best use of those resources. Currently, it differs quite across different schools.
So, just to get your view, I had a response from the health minister on a written question, and he said that all special education needs schools across Northern Ireland have had nursing provision available to manage identified healthcare needs for the pupils attending them throughout the last 2 years. Would you say you would agree with that?
I think that's a slightly different question, slightly different answer, because that's about nursing needs, and of course the nursing needs of children are met in some shape or form. But the question is how we meet them best.
I'm just asking if they have had nursing provision available in the last 2 years. From your understanding, and certainly mine, I'm not sure that's quite accurate.
I mean, it's nursing provisions are available because it's how the nursing provision is available. So if you have one special school I visited quite recently, where they have some children with profound disabilities, the fact that they have school nursing based in the school or community nursing based in the school allows children to go directly from hospital discharge one day to attend school the next day. That is not possible if there's not nursing on site. Having nursing on site is not the same thing as having nursing needs met. Those are two separate things. So it depends on how we answer the question, because of course the nursing need from a healthcare perspective is met because that's what health services do in general.
Yeah.
But how can we maximise the support in health nursing to make sure we get the best outcome for the special skills we have, which is a slightly different question.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what we're trying to find solutions with. I mean, I've been in contact with health officials to see how we can see if we can think outside the box and do things differently. How we can arrange school nursing in a different way to get solutions, to think more of our special schools as a network of special schools. We only have 40 special schools. Therefore, the school nursing provision should not be seen as a school-by-school basis, but as a network of something. I mean, if we went to the model of appointing a school nurse to one school, as soon as that one nurse is absent for some reason, the school is without support, so that wouldn't work in itself. We have to think differently. How can we get the best use? What's the need we actually have in the schools? How can we use their skills in the best way possible?
Okay.
And that's a slightly different question, slightly different ask, rather than saying we need school nursing. So that's what we're actively working on now. We're meeting with health officials again in the next couple of weeks to see if we can we think outside the box and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think you probably find the schools think how it was working was fine, and there's a concern now that if something like an emergency happens and there's a nurse not on site for kids with those profound needs, that you're putting them at risk, and you're transferring that risk to people who aren't medically trained to try and deal with it. But I'm going to move on to SPIMS now.
It has to be a very, very brief one, Michelle.
Yeah,
so
just really quick. Well, I'll make it as quick as I possibly can. In terms of the workforce for SPIMS, and we know these have been an increasing number, how were you finding the resource? Where are the teachers coming from to resource our SPIMS?
I mean, it's a difficult ask, and again, it comes back to if we can get certainty on where the SPIMS are going to be, it allows us as an organisation to be able to go out and support the schools to try and recruit in terms of the teaching workforce. We know that we have to run a pilot through Robbie, and Robbie might want to speak to it in more detail around where, particularly the classrooms in Locality East, we've set up a scheme to try and recruit as on a collective basis. I don't know if you want to go into that, Robbie, in a little bit of detail.
I guess I'm trying to, because we haven't got much time, trying to get to, are these like highly inexperienced teachers coming into these settings? And I assume you would have a concern about that. I mean, they're just picking this up on the job, or are they skilled and trained enough to come into these?
So look, the reality is it's a mix, Michelle. But yes, of course, the newly trained teachers are likely to be coming into schools as new teachers. I mean, when we are engaging with schools, we would be suggesting, but again, it's down to the school. We would be suggesting that they would try and maybe utilise some of the more experienced teachers to move into the SPIM environment, and then allow their new teachers to, I suppose, get their first year in the mainstream classes. But look, we acknowledge that is an issue. One of the other things that we're looking at in terms of the proposals to support SPIMS is some dedicated time between roughly April, June, where we go in and we do some more broader whole school training, which would mean that we could increase the number of teachers and classroom assistants that are accessing the specialist training that we provide. Because again, in listening to schools, they've said to us, it's more than just the specialist provision. It's the fact, how do we deal with the challenging behaviours in the mainstream? How do we actually deal with a situation when a teacher's off sick one day and we need to, wear a classroom assistant? So we're hearing that, and so one of the proposals is that we would have dedicated bespoke package of training and support that we would deliver for those new schools that are stepping up to the plate to do that, and we would provide that to those schools over the third term.
And Chair, if I could just, I know
we are officially out of time, so it would need to be
one of the big issues was more not so much the teachers, because there's ways of working, or was the classroom assistants and getting the classroom assistants into the units. So listening to the feedback we were getting from school leaders, one of the things we've done, we've put a pilot in place in the hardest to place, which was Belfast and Newton Abbey. That's running at the moment. We're getting good feedback from schools in relation to that. And what we're doing is we go out and we do all the initial advertising in relation. We pull together a pool. We do all the checks. We make sure they've got the experience. We make sure the Access NI checks are all done in place. And then when the school comes and they need somebody quickly, what we have is a list of people available. And then we give them the names. The school then goes and interviews those people. And then they decide whether to appoint those people. And what was happening previous to that, maybe 13, 14 weeks, and we've cut that period right down. Now the pilot's still running, and we will assess it at the end of the year, and there's probably some lessons, but the initial feedback is very positive.
There, I'm keen to make just 2 minutes.
Apologies, John.
Yeah.
Sorry, John.
Sorry.
I'm just bringing in members in the order they've indicated.
Sorry, I thought you'd finished with everyone. Sorry, my mistake.
No, that's fine. I'll just bring the
Apologies,
members
Chair.
in.
Yeah.
No problem. So Dana, you were next.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. I've actually changed where I was going to go with my questions. I'm going to start with does see the training stuff. Like Dale, I can already see a problem with this. April and June, right? Why not like August before the kids come back, but when the teachers are back in? Because my problem with April and June, and it's just me and I'm not a teacher, and I'm saying, kids, you're going to be taking people out of the classroom who are very much needed for those children.
So our proposal, again, working, listening to schools, is that, and again, we need to finalise this, is that we would be allowing those teachers to move out, and that there would obviously have to be substitute cover for the classes that they're out.
Get that deal. I'm going to hazard a guess here. Do you do your training in August time?
I do training throughout the year, but I'm not going to disagree with you, Donnie. It may well be that some of the training will be delivered over the August period. It may be. Look, we're not going to be set in stone. I suppose what I'm saying is we're developing a package based on the feedback that we're getting from schools. We're trying to finalise that. At a high level, we're saying that it would be towards the end of the next school year in preparation for the new school year. But yes, absolutely, Donnie, it may well be. But remember, we're going to have to provide this training to potentially over 100 schools. So there's a logistical issue there as well that we need to work our way through.
I appreciate that. And that, again, Dale, that comes down to the situation that we're in over the years and years of bad planning, to be honest with you. And look, the lit teams, we're going to have more questions when you leave here today. I'm just going to be honest with you. School leaders, Sankos, are saving the bacon of the EA and the DE. There's no question about that. See what you have answered today. I guarantee you we're going to have 100 questions tomorrow, because they're not going to believe a single word that's been said here, because what we're hearing from them is a complete contrast to how you're portraying this today. And I'm sure there's probably steam flying out of many of their ears, because 30 staff, is that about what 11-15% of lit teachers are now needed to be recruited? Is that what I heard?
We have a full-time equivalence of about 200, so head count is obviously higher.
How can you sit there and say that more children are actually getting the service if there's a huge gap there of actual staff?
But that gap existed before as well. So this is what I'm trying to. So if I wasn't clear enough, and I can apologise, we're not increasing the lit space because we don't have investment to do that. I would love to increase the lit teams. They would provide a much better service if we had a bigger lit teams, but we don't have the budgets to do that. I mean, it's that simple.
The lit team has been almost like set up as the flagship, as this is where we need to go. It used to be, I'm not going through all the names of it, we know we don't have the allied health professionals there, but this was really set up to be, this is going to change things. We're already here, and it's way beyond teething problems, and we bit of blaming when you say resistance deal, to be honest. Right across the region, I'm really picking up from lit teams that this is not good. It's like really bad. It's not child centred, and the teaching time is not happening. Like, it's almost like telling teachers to suck eggs.
But this, and if you can give me examples off the record here, so I can investigate, because that is not what I'm hearing, right? And if we're hearing different things, I want to fix the issue, if you know what I mean, because it should be. I mean, the way the lit model is set up, the way the lit model should work, is more efficient, wrapping around the child to provide better support for children, and more efficient, more one-to-one support for children. That is the intention. The intention is not to remove teachers from one-to-one support to children.
Maybe
right?
the intention, but that's not what is happening is what we're being told.
But what I'm being told from like team members when I go to speak to them is that they see more children. So I mean, and this is what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but that's not what I'm hearing. So if you give me examples, I can go investigate that, because I can't. I mean, if I'm hearing one thing and you're saying a different thing, that's a problem for me.
Yeah, but it is also difficult for teachers to come forward also. To be brutally honest, and that's why they do come to us and give us that idea of exactly what's going on. And they are probably watching, and that's, I mean, there will probably be 100 questions waiting for us probably tomorrow on the back of the evidence today.
But I can't fix, if it is a problem in service, I can't fix it unless I know the data of the problem. But
well, I mean, a lot of it was pointed out in the last evidence, and the Senkos, to be fair, it was hard hitting, to be honest.
And again, the biggest challenge with Senkos is that we don't have capacity in service. They won't refer children that we can't see, right? But if you have questions, get afterwards, send them to us, and I will respond to you. I'll give you that absolute assurance.
Appreciate that. So I don't want to I'm not long. Just to move on quickly then to the transport side of it, I'm sure we'd all agree that the communication side of it was probably the worst it's been this year. Was diabolical, if I'm being honest. My question really is, has investment came from DE into the EA teams to do that job? Because I know it's not easy for them to try and to work out the transport. Are they still doing it from pen and paper, or is it getting digitalised?
Well, first of all, I
answer on this.
Yeah, well, we're going to two things. I mean, I wouldn't categorise it as diabolical. I think it was certainly difficult for a number of children at the end. I'm not disagreeing with you in terms of for a number of parents and a number of families, but it wasn't diabolical across the whole of the transport service. It was pure for a number of children.
Always impacted the most. That's the reality.
I know, but I'm also
trying
to.
There's 90,000 kids who go through transport. I get that, but when you're talking about the system making these children the most vulnerable children, it's not that they're vulnerable.
But I also don't want it presented that every single child who has a SEN has every single child has a really poor experience in terms of the allocation of transport. I'm not diminishing what you're saying, but I can't just sit there and accept the word diabolical in terms for
hundreds.
Well, look, I'm not sure it was hundreds. In terms of
many of them. Maybe we can get to the question on investment and answer that quickly.
In terms of that, absolutely. What we have at the moment is we have systems in place, and we have developing a business case to bring in more digital enhanced systems to help us improve our route planning. That isn't in itself going to be the solution, because we can have all the best digital route planning in place, but until the children are actually placed in a named school, we don't know where we're replanning those children. Absolutely, as a logistical service, we want to have the best technology in place, and we have a case in place.
Paper still now, the teams.
Well, I mean, they're using other digital systems. They use GIS. They use Microsoft. It's not that they're sitting there with pen and paper and somehow it's like, a quill pen, Donny. But I mean, absolutely, we would prefer to have the most up to date digital route planning systems. But equally, what I'm saying is, if I get the most up to date digital route planning systems in the morning, some of the issues that you've raised are still going to pertain, because ultimately, until we address the issue, which is that most schools take on specialist provisions, then that will absolutely improve.
When you have the best systems in place.
We absolutely want, but equally as well, we know that there's huge conflicting pressures on capital investment, and a lot of money is being spent on the construction for special schools and all the SPIMs, etc. But yes, hopefully we can get the investment.
But when you raise something
we'll draw a line on that one. Gary, you were next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, guys, for your presentation, and I also welcome your clarity. Obviously, these savings measures, will cause some concern, but I think that your clarification there in terms of the immediate impact potentially, I think should bring some reassurance. That being said, the £40 million effective taxi bill, is completely unsustainable. So I really hope that those providers that they will work with you, because that cannot continue into the future. Sticking on the issue of transport, in your briefing paper you had said that 42% of your EA fleet is exceeding its recommended lifespan, which is obviously another time bomb, if you like, in terms of pressure. What measures are being put in place then, I suppose, and to sort of address that? Obviously there's clearly savings to be made. So, are there any contingencies been put in place as to a potential issue arising from that area as well?
I mean, in terms of contingencies, the operational contingencies are the pressure there primarily is then it costs more on our resource budget to maintain the fleet because vehicles require more time to be spent, more parts to be replaced because they're older vehicles. If they're older vehicles, the chances are as well, actually their fuel economy isn't as efficient as the more modern vehicles. In terms of the contingency, it's about making the case for investment in the EA fleet. The difficulty is that to make that case, we're making the case against all the other conflicting capital requirements that are required across the education system. So it is difficult, and I think probably what tends to happen, Gary, is, if we need to build a SPIM, we need to build a SPIM, but can we keep the bus going another year? Yes, we can keep the bus going another year, but at some point we are going to get to the point that the fleet becomes unsustainable moving forward. But we absolutely making the case to the department that we need to increase the investment in the home to school transport fleet. I mean, ultimately, at a point, it would reach that we would need to then, if we were unable to operate our own vehicles, we'd have to reach out and either ask Translink to provide more services or seek to put in place more privately operated buses.
It could increase the cost?
It could potentially increase the cost, yes. So, but again, I do think that moving forward in terms of transport, more generally, I think we need to look at that model of transport provision around what do we provide, what does Translink provide, and what can private operators provide as well. And I do think there's efficiencies to be achieved by looking at that mixed model and being a little bit more discerning about how we operate vehicles, how Translink operate, and how we utilise the private sector as well.
In terms of staffing vacancies within EA transport, what does that look like? Are there shortages there as well in terms of recruitment?
I mean, again, there's an industry-wide shortage of drivers across all, be those HGV drivers or those BPSV drivers. I know that recently through our pay and grading review, we were able to increase the pay for those lower bands. So that differential between an EA bus driver and a Translink bus driver has dissipated to some extent. So yes, we have pockets of pressure there. It can be difficult to recruit at times, but it hasn't probably been the pressure that it has been previously.
And the driver academy that was planned, is it still going ahead for January?
We are planning with that to go ahead, yes.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Gary. Probably is a natural follow-on just to ask about, when you referenced it in your briefing, the multi-people vehicles that were bought, and with only 2 of them in operation, substantial spend on that. Very briefly, can you give any assurances? So, I mean, if you're making a case for capital investment and then vehicles are sitting, is it 9 out of 11 sitting not being used?
So, I mean, it's interesting way to characterise the chair. I think what we did was we made a case and we got the money, and we knew that absolutely that would be about planning for this school year. We made a reasonable assumption. I mean, we put out an ad for drivers in April 2025. We had close to 80 applicants. We thought this would be a really attractive post because they don't need to actually have a bus driving licence. As it transpired, we were only able to recruit 5 individuals out of that, 2 of which are operating now, and the other 3 are about to operate, and we're now currently in the process of trying to recruit to that. So look, we reasonably planned out that actually we would have those vehicles operating sooner than now. But when it came to the recruitment, we've been a little bit surprised with the fact that it wasn't as an attractive post as we expected it to be.
So out of 80 applicants, you only recruit.
Well, because a significant number withdrew, and by the time we went through the process and did our checks, we were only able to manage to appoint 5 individuals into that. So look, we're out currently now, as I understand it, trying to recruit into that. So look, it's not about we're deliberately letting those vehicles sit. But they're there and they will be utilised as soon as we get the drivers for them.
Be clear, not trying to characterise it that anybody's happy that they're sitting not being used, but it is a point of fact that they're not being used, and it is just a case. I mean, that is a potential model which could deliver a more cost-effective service.
I think, Chair, it is one model. It's an approach where if we can get the drivers to that allows us to manage the private sector a little bit different by saying, you know what, guys, we don't like what you're doing over there. We're going to do that ourselves. But I don't think it would be something that we would be looking to extend that much more extensively than what we have at the moment.
Okay. Dave.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I'm going to stay on fleet for the moment. It's probably the question around, you mentioned your briefing around the legislative and environmental pressures and the impact that the Climate Change Act that was brought through this place will have, and requiring a 48% reduction by 2030. Can I ask if you've estimated what cost, what that would cost over the next 5 years to meet that target?
I don't have that figure. I think our greater challenge is actually being able to procure vehicles that meet the standard that we meet in terms of the types of vehicles, and getting in place the infrastructure. So if they're going to be hybrid electric vehicles, so Translink quite clearly are set up as a transport operator. To some extent, EA, whilst we operate the third biggest fleet of vehicles on the island of Ireland, we're in the business of supporting all education services, so it's one part of our business. So that is a challenge for us moving forward about how we can sustain the EA fleet moving forward in the context of that and other constraints.
Imagine with the size of the fleet that you've just outlined, that would be a significant pressure. But I guess I'm trying to pick up what the next point that I was going to make there. You've said that the buses no, hold on a second, sorry.
It's okay not to have a question.
Yes, no, I do.
It's a really hard question.
Do you think that and this might be outside your remit, do you think the legislation we currently have around taxis and taxi legislation is creating a position where there is a monopoly of companies, and therefore that's affecting your ability, the market is not there for you to gain better pricing when you go out to? And the other question I was going to ask, you can answer on the back of that, is whether whenever you are procuring lifts from those providers, does that is that part of your target as well, or does that target only apply to what you're doing as an entity yourself?
So look, in terms of the legislation, some of that legislation was something that we all wanted in terms of bringing better governance around who could and couldn't be taxi operators. That was done intentionally. But we are now in a position where the response to that from the market is that there are less taxi operators. So one of the things that I want to do working with the department is to explore with with officials in the Department of Infrastructure is, look, how do we increase the number of taxi operators in the system, which is both good for me in terms of education, but I think is more widely in terms of the public transport network and all the benefits that we talk about having taxi operators. We all hear anecdotally about that we all can't get taxis for social reasons as well. So look, I think we need to look at how we stimulate that taxi market. I think I can do some of that. We can do some of that through our models of procurement and how we can provide some certainty around funding and the models about the way we procure. I'm sorry, ask me the other question. I'm unclear what the second bit was.
It's whether whenever you're going for the private providers to provide transport, whether that is included as part of your target environmental targets, or whether it's just EA's fleet that counts towards that?
It will be predominantly the EA fleet that we will look at that, but I think we will probably have to factor in some contractual requirements on private operators as well. But our biggest focus is on the EA fleet.
One more question, just to move on quickly, if that's okay. And that's, I've heard from parents around their fears around what this might mean if there's a change in their provider or the type of transport that they're accessing. Is there any support there at the moment in terms of familiarisation and so on for children who have those needs to, so that it's not such a sudden change for them the morning that their transport changes? Is there anything in there to support them?
I mean, we have tried to develop some resources around what it would be like, particularly for SEND children. What would the first day be like on school transport? But I think in the context of the savings, and if we're moving to different providers, I think it will be relatively limited. We will try our absolute best to make sure that there's some element of lead-in time if it happens to be another operator. So that normally what we would ask the operator to do is ask the driver and escort to introduce themselves to the family so that they can introduce themselves to the child. So look, if it happens to be another driver or an escort, then that's what we would be seeking to do.
Thank you. I know maybe a suggestion at the end, but we'll come back.
We'll come to sort of concluding action at the end. And then the last indication I have is from John.
Thank you. That was very useful. The budget for taxis, I mean, it's talking £30 million a year. And that's, I think, 5,000 children who require taxis every year, which is an astonishing number. I've previously got the figure that the longest journey was 2 hours, 50 minutes. What would be the shortest journey that any child would be using a publicly funded taxi to get to?
Well, certainly in terms of distance, John, we would certainly have a reasonable number of children that would certainly be travelling under a mile, under half a mile. We could seek to get the exact figure. Some of that will be we'll have to figure out, do we know the exact distance? Because in terms of procuring as well, you don't procure on the basis of half a mile. So you know, was the journey 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles? So we would need to dig down into a bit more granular detail. But certainly anecdotally and from the information I have from the local offices, we certainly would be providing transport to children where the distance from home to school is relatively short.
Okay, well, I'd be very keen to get that information. Yeah. And it'd be useful for our inquiry.
Okay.
Looking further afield, are you aware of the Department of Infrastructure? Because I've heard this, that the taxi numbers are down to 50%. Clearly, supply-demand factors mean that the cost of taxis then can go up. There's less competition. Are you aware of the Department of Infrastructure doing anything to encourage more people to be taxi drivers?
John, the answer to that is I'm not aware, albeit that doesn't mean to say that the Department of Infrastructure aren't doing anything. But at this stage, I've only started to work with our department around engaging with the Department of Infrastructure to determine how we might stimulate, more taxi operators into the market.
Yeah. I've asked that question, so I think it's very interesting for a range of issues, not just this, but also, of course, our nighttime economy and things. The third and 4 questions, but they're very, very quick. Wheelchair access taxis, much more expensive than ordinary taxis. Is that a challenge that you face? Because obviously the drivers don't get maybe the similar return, but they've got a bigger outlay.
Yeah, I mean that has been a challenge, and again, I think that has come with a change to the regulations and the need to provide more equity of provision to all users, including disabled users. So at a point in time, an operator with a disabled access vehicle certainly would have been able to charge a premium both to the general public and to us in terms of operating that vehicle. What we've seen over the intervening period is as they have gone to change their vehicles, they can operate a normal taxi car at the same, and get the same rate per mile because they've got a taxi fare. Yeah, they're capped in terms of what they can charge, and a person who has a disability has the right to access public transport at the same rate as a person who doesn't, a non-disabled person. And I think some of the taxi operators have taken some commercial decisions because you're faced with, do I buy a £50,000 vehicle that's wheelchair compliant and I can only get X amount of pounds per mile, or I buy an ordinary car at half the price and I'm still going to get the same income. So we definitely saw over that intervening period, whenever those equity provisions came into place, we definitely saw a drop off of taxi operators operating disabled access vehicles because I think they didn't see a business, a business reason to do that.
So equity provisions have actually resulted in less equity because there's fewer of these vehicles available to take children who need them.
Well, I would characterise it as it has driven up the demand for the limited number of vehicles and has increased the cost to the Education Authority in terms of contractual requirements for vehicles.
By the way, I think there should be support for children. I just think that the DFI actually need to incentivise in some way, create support to encourage taxi operators and drivers to actually buy those vehicles.
And look, from an EA perspective, we would be very supportive of that because the more vehicles that have disability access suits the needs of what we would need as well from a market perspective.
Yeah. I've asked the DFI that, so I'll wait and see the answer. The final one is this, talking about unintended consequences, but perhaps foreseeable consequences. 2035, you're going to have to buy only electric vehicles?
Yes.
And how's that going to affect your budget? And that's because of climate, these net zero and climate change policies?
Look, it's as it currently stands, those types of vehicles are probably twice the premium of a diesel-powered vehicle now. So yes, there's going to be an increased ask in terms of capital. It's also going to make it more difficult, probably in the long terms, to make a sustainable business case for the operations of the vehicle. So yes, and the associated infrastructure that would be around that, John, in terms of how we charge those vehicles. Our fleet operates in a really interesting way, particularly the rural areas. Many of those drivers will have vehicles at home because that meets the needs in those areas, and they operate from their homes. So look, we do have some logistical challenges in terms of moving the fleet into those more environmentally friendly vehicles.
Well, that's where I'll cap it off. It seems to me, there are a lot of issues, and I will ask difficult questions, but you are caught in many of the other crosshairs of departments not working properly together or foreseeing issues when they frame and draft this legislation. But thanks for your evidence. It's very useful.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Okay, members, so thank you to the witnesses from EA, and I know that you're scheduled to be in front of us again a number of times before Christmas, so we appreciate your engagement with the committee's work. Thank you for your time. Okay, members, so just while the witnesses are making their way out, there were a few things I think that there was interest in picking up in terms of correspondence. I mean, if I could maybe just put one out as a sort of maybe one that might catch a few issues, and I'm picking up on some of the questions the Deputy Chair was asking, really around some of the detail in that press release around the impact of the cost saving measures that are being suggested. Not all of it linked to SEN. Would it be appropriate to seek an urgent, detailed written briefing at this stage around what specifically is on the table, what is being proposed, and what the impact will be in the system? I mean, I'm happy to suggest that if members are in agreement, or if we think there's something more we'd like to do.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed. Okay.
I would be particularly concerned about the stopping referrals to AOTIS. Where do those children go if they're not going to be referred?
Yeah, I've no sense of what the sort of scale of the private sector involvement in that is, and what the likely impact therefore will be. So I think getting some of the detail on that would be very helpful. Danny?
Yeah, it's just on a separate wee matter. It's just it was John had said it just as part of the presentations. Like, all of us got the same amount of time as we would always get when we were questioning witnesses. I just want to put that on the record that there was no hindrance of us questioning both presentations today, and I think it's very important that people know that, because we didn't waste any of them questioning times, and we weren't talking about the Middle East, we were talking about the Minister, to be specific. But I think it's, if the public watching need to know that my time was the same as it's always been, that you give us in every single presentation.
If I can speak to that as chair, if anything, I gave everybody more time than they usually got, because we were taking evidence on the inquiry, and also we had a very large panel to start with, which makes keeping to the 5 minutes trickier. So I've been watching the time religiously through this, and it is everybody without exception got more than the usual.
Should I just raise a point of information?
Yes.
Both Dale and John, when he was asking questions, said that the taxi budget was 30 million. According to the paper that was supplied by the Education Authority, it's 39,700,000. So 40 million is the figure that people should be using if they want to round it up.
Yeah, I mean, the figure I was sending an answer recently was 30, but maybe it's changed. I'll certainly run with 40.
It's going to depend on the year, and I think we've been given previous year figures before, which was around that 27 million mark. But the most recent figures there in that briefing were up closer to 40 million. David?
Chair, I would suggest that we write to the Committee for Infrastructure. I know that they've looked at taxi legislation in other ways, but I think we should highlight to them the pressures that how we regulate our taxi, notwithstanding how they may look at it, how we regulate taxis and so on. And of course, we want to make sure that drivers are safe and so on, but it is having an impact and will have an impact on the vast cost to the education system in providing transport to SEN pupils and so on, and just that they take that into consideration in any look that they're having at how the the ecosystem is with taxis, because I think it is, John's right, it's not for us to, but in terms of nighttime economy, there's huge issues with supply of taxis and under pressure from, gig economy in terms of, takeaway drivers and Amazon and all sorts of things. But I think they do need to be informed of how it's impacting the education system as well, and so they can take that into the considerations.
Intent for a letter to go on that basis, if we're agreed? Yeah. Agreed. Okay. So we'll leave it there. Obviously, a lot of that will feed into the inquiry evidence. So we'll move on to the next item in the agenda. Now, as luck would have it, after the meeting we do have a substantial amount of correspondence, so I will try and be as rapid as I possibly can through this. And if there are some things that it might be appropriate to defer, I will do so. So I'd refer members to pages 194 to 600 of their packs, and then pages 17 to 271 of your tabled papers, where we have a number of items tabled under correspondence. Your summary notes at page 194. So as usual, I'll just highlight those that maybe require a committee decision. So item 8.3, page 205, it's correspondence from the Committee for Infrastructure, and it's seeking views on the Infrastructure, Water, Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. Happy to hear views, but I would want to suggest that it mightn't be a bad idea for us to write to both the department and the EA to seek any policy they have around flood management and sustainable drainage in schools in terms of new builds and refurbs, and then we can perhaps feed that in if members are agreed. Agreed. Item 8.4, page 268. It's a response from the Minister of Education to issues raised by the IAF on the parental school admission surveys. The IAF had raised a number of concerns around the methodology of that. So I'd want to just note, I think this letter, the response perhaps raises more questions than it does deliver answers, but we are short of time, so I'm going to suggest at this point that we share the response with the IAF and ask them, and I would like to seek a detailed response from them, because it's quite a complex issue. But I do want to note, I think it seems totally unacceptable that the survey was shared widely with people not engaged with the admissions process, which was the stated purpose of the survey. And we have the Minister admitting that should not have happened. So I think there are real questions as to why that happened, but would suggest in the first instance we may want to hear from the Integrated Education Fund to begin with, if we're agreed. Agreement on that? Mm-hmm. Great. Item 8.6 on page 275, it's correspondence from Children in Northern Ireland who coordinate the Partnership for Inclusive Education. So it's a conglomerate of organisations interested in special educational needs issues in education, and particularly the impact on parents and children. So they provided a response for our inquiry, which I would propose go into our pack, but they've also indicated they would be keen to provide a briefing. So I'd want to suggest we do look at scheduling a briefing with the partnership, and if that is possible in the new year, I understand from correspondence that they are keen to feed some oral evidence into the inquiry, be that informal or I would suggest a formal briefing should the work plan permit that, if members are agreed. Are we agreed? Grant, I don't want to run a dictatorship here, so I do need an indication if there's any dissent in views there. Item 8.7, page 305, is a response from the Department of Education, which provides additional information following the briefing on the General Teaching Council legislation which is proposed. So that there is an invite there for us to engage directly and meet with I think the Chief Exec of the GTCNI prior to our committee stage commencing. I see no reason why we shouldn't avail of that opportunity if members are agreed. Right. Yeah. Item 8.11, page 379, is a response from the Education Minister on the initial teacher education bursary scheme. The Minister indicates that the purpose of the scheme is to increase the number of applications and enrolments in subjects experiencing teacher shortages, and the subjects eligible for bursary support were identified using evidence from the Department's 2024 Recruitment and Retention Survey, as well as some historical application data that they used. I want to suggest that we note, I think all members, and indeed the committee, received quite a lot of correspondence on this, so I would suggest in the first instance we share that with the correspondents who had been in touch, and we then can deal with any responses coming back if we're agreed. Agreed. Item 8.12, page 381, and item 8.45 in tabled papers. So, members, this is correspondence from two individuals who have raised concerns about the language used at the SEN briefing, specifically on the 22nd of October. And so it was specifically in relations made by one of our committee members, John Burrows. So I think at this stage, and I'll just to be clear from my perspective, I sought advice within the Assembly staffing structures as the appropriate way to deal with this. So I'm going to give John the opportunity to respond to anything he would like to in relation to that correspondence in terms of putting any comments he made into context. And then we can take it from there in terms of anything further, and we can perhaps reach an agreement in terms of how we might respond in more detail to those correspondence if considered appropriate at that stage.
There's other correspondence too in table papers, Chair?
Yes, there is. Yes, sorry. Yes, so it's item 8.12 in our packs, and then item 8.45 in table papers is to refer to that. So, John, if I'll give you the opportunity to respond at this stage.
Thanks, Chair. I take both the responsibility to ask proper questions and also to do it in a appropriate manner very seriously. I totally refute that the language is inappropriate, and I have to be quite bullish on this. We are in closed session, by the way, Emma. Just before
we're currently in open session. So if
okay,
if there is a suggestion of a need to go into closed session, we'd need committee agreement to do that.
I will go into closed session at one point in the end. Then, so first of all is we're dealing with really important issues, and we are an assembly, we are a scrutiny committee, and it's important that there is space to deal with issues that are challenging in a sensitive but honest way. I've reviewed Hansard, and I was very conscious. I've been speaking in the public domain on sensitive issues for many, many years. And I reviewed the comments I made, and I've looked at Hansard, first of all, to the Education Minister. And one of the complainants has referenced concerns I made about sensory rooms not being sufficiently padded, and that somehow I wanted to put children in a padded cell. And that is completely erroneous. That is not reflected in Hansard. In fact, I echoed the comments of the need for investment and pressed the Minister that the sensory rooms in schools that I had visited were inadequate, were not big enough, were makeshift. They were often storerooms that were converted into sensory rooms. They had stud walls when they should have walls that you can't hear through, because the children need to be able to regulate if they've become dysregulated, and hearing noise outside doesn't help. And that actually some of them are only half padded whenever the specification means they should be fully padded. So I was calling for more support for special education needs children, not less. Second of all, I raised the issue of children, of teachers being injured. And there is very significant evidence that children, particularly teachers of children who are P1 and P2, are being injured at school. Concussion, broken bones, bite marks, and being spat at. This is not a reflection on the children. It is a reflection on the lack of support and provision that teachers are being given when delivering in mainstream schools special education needs provision. Specialist schools have certain levels of equipment, training, and support. Mainstream schools do not. It's a straightforward health and safety issue, and I believe that if one of the teachers or unions actually tried to sue the Education Authority, they would win, because they're not being provided with the education, with the training, equipment, and necessary support to deal with a difficult situation. That also means that the teachers cannot de-escalate things as quickly as they would like to. Nothing in that was in any way offensive. These are important issues, and I'll continue to speak for children. I've raised this with the Minister directly in writing about the lack of equipment. I'll then move on to the comments I made to Chris Donnelly. And I praise Chris Donnelly because he did raise a very significant issue about the developmental levels of some children coming to schools, and the fact that he and other professionals have said the same, that there were some children who were presenting with more developmental issues than had been in the past. And I said this was a matter of public interest and concern, and that it needed researched, and that we needed to understand the full understanding of what could be causing that. And in that, I said there are issues that could be biological, there are issues that could be environmental, there could be issues linked to social and economic deprivation, and there could be issues linked to overstimulation of, for example, screens. And again, that is something that is for us as a society to address. None of the language I've used, in my view, was inappropriate. I have one more point to make, which I'll ask to make in closed session, and I would ask that if there is any outstanding concern about my conduct, that the Standards Commissioner examines it. I'm also happy to meet the two individual complainants and speak to them directly, so they can have an understanding where I was coming from.
Thank you, John. So I need to, if we're going to move into closed session, and before we do that and to seek agreement on that, we'll obviously make sure that there is a very clear summary of what is appropriate for us to share of anything discussed in closed session, and we obviously do need to reach committee agreement on how to respond to the correspondence. But I think if there is any potential risk of individual correspondence being identified, I'm content that we move into closed session if other members agree, but I would ask if we can have a brief discussion if that is agreed. Agreed. Okay, if we could just move into closed session. Okay, members, so that is us back into open session, and I'll maybe ask the clerk just to summarise what was agreed, but just to be clear that the brief move into closed session was simply to ensure that no individuals' identities were disclosed in any of our discusussions. So if I just ask you maybe just to summarise what was discussed and agreed.
Certainly, yes. The committee discussed that John was open to meeting the correspondence, has put his response on the record, which is in line with advice from me and from Clark and colleagues, that he should have that opportunity in the first instance. John has also made it clear that he's open to being investigated by the Commissioner for Standards should the correspondence feel that his explanation doesn't adequately meet the code of conduct of MLAs. And in the closed session, really there was just a little bit of context discussed, which would be personal data and subject to protections such as GDPR. So it was for fair and good integrity treatment of that information that the committee went into closed session.
Thank you. I'll just close that item off, and look, this reflects some remarks I've also made in closed session. Very, very clear in my role as chair, I have no role to censor any member. That is not my role, nor would I ever attempt to do so. Each member around this table is here based on their own electoral mandate, their own party political context, and are free to express themselves. I wanted to just make a comment broadly, as I've received a correspondence on the issue of just language, including at times my own, so I want to be very, very clear on that, of people watching the committee who'll contact you and say, look, I think you could have expressed X or Y in a different way. For me, special educational needs is a very, very broad category. It applies to a whole range of different sets of needs, and I think we need to be conscious that when we use the phrase SEN, that parents watching that may well assume, even if it is not our intention, that we are speaking about them and speaking about their child. So it's just to ensure that we're all conscious of the need for nuance in that. There is no such thing as SEN being one thing, and I think we all need to just be really careful that we're reflecting the broad range of needs and contexts that parents find themselves in. But I say that, I speak to myself when I say that, and I put it out there for all members, and I think we're all in a position where we want to hear good evidence in this inquiry to hopefully deliver better outcomes for children. That's what we should be about in the committee. Okay, so we will. Sorry, to bring the deputy chair.
Yeah, and I know John has been enthusiastic since he came onto the committee about trying to identify what the causes of the sort of upsurge in the number of children presenting with special educational needs. What's behind it, and there was some discussion about asking the Assembly research people to carry out research, but I think there was agreement on the committee that the capacity wasn't there to do that. It's something that needs to be carried out at a higher academic and research level, and that's fair enough. I think we need to accept that this inquiry isn't going to identify the cause of the upsurge in the number of kids presenting with special educational needs. John has his own views about that, and he has articulated them on a number of occasions now. I've heard him mention that one of the letters talks about sweets and screen time, and going into a house where 2-year-old kids sitting watching a massive screen with bowls of sweets. And I can understand how parents of children with special needs could be offended by that. And I'm not suggesting John actually meant that, but that was the meaning taken from it.
You may read from Hansard, sorry, instead of reading from the complainant's letter. Have you read what I said from Hansard as opposed to the third?
By at least one of the complainants. And, you know, as I say, we live in an age of social media, all sorts of conspiracy theories. I mean, we've people out in West Belfast burning mobile phone masts because they're saying they give people cancer. You know, tinfoil hat brigade. And we need to be very careful, and I accept what you're saying, Chair. Absolutely every one of us needs to be careful what we're saying. And that's all I have to say on the issue.
Thank you, Sir Danny. That's just for a very brief
Yeah,
comment.
no,
We're very conscious of time.
It was just to echo that, and look, it's something that I try to relay in the committee, especially around that time, what Trump was saying in America. We have to be very conscious, particularly through the inquiry, of what is said. And that's all, just to be a wee bit courteous, and even if you don't mean it, look, just put our hands up. Sometimes you get things wrong, go, it's not what I meant, and not be bullish about it, and say people are watching, they want us to try and help, and that's to do with placements and transport and all the things that we're talking about, and that's not at any way lay blame to parents and children with special educational needs.
Danny and David, again, just briefly.
Just because it's an issue that's come up a few times, again, don't want to get into it. I probably accept actually what Pat's saying around the idea that finding a cause, if there's a cause there, is something that needs to be done at a higher level and so on. I think what some of us were asking for, I understand if there's not the resource there, was a sort of what is out there, because we're not all experts in this field, and I think the timing of that discussion probably came at a time whenever things were going on in the United States, but I've heard it referred to a number of times, you know, I'm not trying to debate it, but a number of times since then. You know, asking those questions and being curious about what is the cause and so on doesn't always come with an agenda. It doesn't always come with. I certainly wasn't trying to nail the colours to a mast in terms of Trump's approach. Not discounting it anyway. I don't know enough about it, frankly. But you know, it's just I don't think we should be curious about these things, but I accept that probably it was beyond the abilities of us to do that. But I think some of what John said in the past and what we've said is actually just trying to understand the issue better, and I think I would ask for good grace in taking some of the questions asked at face value rather than necessarily the commentary that is going on in the wider world.
And look, as I've said, on my role as chair to censor or control contributions from members, we all bring different perspectives, and please be brief.
It's very, very brief. I don't want to drag it out.
Come back as well.
What I
Chair.
just think everybody should, maybe we're talking about reading Hansard, I think everybody should go back and read the Hansard from the evidence that we heard from the autism review about language. I think it would be very worthwhile if we all went back and had a read at that.
And I would draw members' attention to the informal briefing, that the recording of that is available, which I found to be a very helpful session if members do want to revisit that as well from the autism reviewer.
I would say, Chair, that not all, from conversations I've had, and I'm not taking away from it, that the autism reviewer is a respected voice, but not a voice that every parent agrees with on every issue. So I would just make that point as well.
It was just drawing attention to the recording being available, and John, and I'll draw a line under the conversation.
Yeah, I'll just come back at the comments from the three Sinn Féin members, particularly Pat and Danny. I don't know what's funny, Danny. We're discussing a serious issue.
The cancer, John, as you described us the other day.
No, I said the language.
Just ask if we could try not to bring this into too much of a party political zone. I think we are conscious that this is an issue that is you know, parents are watching the committee, and I just asked
that's why I'm concerned about.
So John, I'll bring you back.
John laughed when you brought up the complaints. Just put that on the record.
No, I didn't.
I'm gonna ask no more back and forth, John. Bring you in.
I didn't interrupt Danienko, to put my comments, which were precisely and compassionately framed in the tinfoil hat brigade, the burning down of 5G masts in West Belfast, and some of Trump's comments are frankly staggering. I just want to read to you, because what you actually did was make the classic mistake of reading the complainant's complaint and attributing to what I said, which are two completely different things. And what I actually said was that we need to be fearless, but also compassionate. And I said, in reference to a comment about screens, towards the tail end of my time in the police, I started going into places, I say this without judgment, of children sitting in front of a massive screen at 2 years of age with a massive bowl of sugary sweets. I said that cannot be good for brain development. I stand over my first-hand evidence to that. Screens and diet are not good for my brain, and they're not good for a lot of people's brains. I made that point. I then went on and I actually said that this was not about in any way judgment on children, on parents who I know have a very tiring responsibility. So throughout, I used measured language, and I really would take issue with the framing of that by the three Sinn Féin members. And I certainly won't have it linked to the comments in the chamber when I said the justification of murder was cancerous to our society and its good relations. I'm sorry that's leaked into this committee.
I'm going to draw a line under this conversation. I think we have probably reached the limit of what is constructive in relation to the correspondence before us, and I think we also need to be careful that we don't get into the space which I was clear the committee does not have a role in terms of investigating a complaint. That is not our role. So I will draw a line.
The only thing is that I know John's an expert on loads of issues, but he's not an expert on brain development.
Deputy Chair, I think it is definitely time to bring this element of the conversation to a close. I think we will be getting some correspondence back to those correspondents, and if there is further follow-up through other channels, that's for a decision for them to make and not for the committee.
Yeah, there was a letter from the EA in your packs about different special educational needs by council area, which was part of what the committee had asked for, and there is still a research question, so I am anticipating something back about, but as the chair says, the range of experiences of special educational needs is really considerable, so that will help clarify.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the next items 8.14 to 8.27, pages 385 to 416 of your packs, and then also some correspondence that is in your tabled papers. There's just a whole range of letters have come in from individuals responding to our call for evidence in terms of SEN inquiry. So I'm going to propose that we note those, add them to the correspondence in the inquiry folder, but also invite those individuals, many of whom have expressed an interest in engaging with the inquiry further, to the stakeholder next week, so that we can have their input. It's a lot of lived experience. We have teachers contacting us, so if members are agreed that would be an appropriate response to that correspondence. Agreed. We also had correspondence from Jonathan Buckley, MLA, really raising similar issues on behalf of his own constituent. I again would suggest that we reach out in the same way if we're agreed. Good. Item 8.28, page 419. It's a written submission from Diverse Youth NI to the strategic review we're undertaking in relation to SEN. Are members content to add that to the inquiry folder? Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 8.29, page 422, 8.31, page 426, 4.3. On page 482 we have a range of material also in tabled papers, which is various correspondence in relation to the Education Minister's visit to Israel. I am going to suggest that we note that. We've had a discussion of that at the top of our meeting, and we could potentially respond to those correspondence just to advise them of the outcome of that discussion. Members are agreed? Agreed.
Sorry, just very, very briefly.
Yes.
One of the items, and I'll get it to you now, apologies, was page 593. Item 8.37. It was in relation to the Minister's visit.
Yes.
People are entitled, obviously, to contact the committee and but there was one of the points that was made. I think one of the schools that was mentioned will be surprised that they were allocated significant funding, because I'm not aware that they were. It was just a factual point that, as I say, there was a school mentioned that had no involvement or had no significant allocation of funding. It was just a factual point, Chair, but I don't even name the school, but it was just,
yes,
I think it's worth noting that it's incorrect.
Yeah, I certainly had no intention of drawing out any of the specifics of that correspondence, and I think, I mean, again, it's
clearly an error, but it's
important
just
to put
worth,
that
I just wanted to put it in
on the record. No, absolutely. But if the broad principle were agreed to acknowledge the correspondence and the outcome of our meeting this morning. Okay, item 8.33, page 429, it's correspondence from an individual regarding an individual transportation complaint for a pupil, but it does also reference our SEN inquiry. I'd want to suggest that we write back and advise that the committee can't engage in the investigation of their complaint with the EA, but we would be very welcome to hear from that individual member if there are issues arising from her experience of the transport service that we feel that she feels would be helpful for our evidence, and we can certainly invite that if members are agreed. Great. Item 8.34, page 432. It's correspondence and briefing paper from the Northern Ireland Food and Drink Association regarding aligning the curriculum with the needs of the food and drink industry. So I should just declare that I did meet with a representative of that organisation, and I had suggested that correspondence to the committee would be the most appropriate way to deal with their issue, which appears to be that they've been trying to engage with the Curriculum Review Task Force and have not been able to get a response. So I would want to propose that we forward their correspondence to the task force and ask them to reach out to engage if members are agreed. Great. Item 8.35, and that's page 435 of your packs, is the Education Authority 24-25 annual report and account, and I would propose at this stage to note, but members are welcome to bring anything back to a future meeting on that should anything arise if we're agreed. Item 8.36, page 589, is a response from the EA providing information on SEN provision broken down by geographical area, which the clerk has referred to already. Are we content to add that correspondence to papers for our SEN inquiry? If members are agreed. Item 8.39 is the correspondence from Jonathan Buckley, MLA, already referred to, so I'll move on to item 8.4, page 597. It's correspondence from the British Heart Foundation and the assessment of the provision of CPR training in schools. Are members content to schedule a briefing in the new year and an update on this from the British Heart Foundation, and if felt appropriate at that time also the department? It is an important curriculum intervention, and be good to get an assessment of where it's at if we are agreed. Item 8.41, page 600, correspondence from an individual regarding consultation on the future of SEA qualifications. So I suppose I would want to just sort of note these are concerns that have been widely shared with the committee across a range of issues around some of the proposals. It does link in specifically to one of our strategic objectives around deprivation and underachievement. The correspondent raises some concerns about the potential impact in that space. I would note we have an informal briefing scheduled with the department week after next, and it would probably be appropriate to review actions after that. I'm going to assume we will need to get a formal briefing from the department, and that the informal one is probably a stopgap at this stage if members are agreed. Great. Item 8.46 in your tabled papers, a letter from the Health Minister advising work will be progressed with the Department of Education further to recommendations arising from the review of the population needs of children with complex needs in special schools, and this was discussed today in the evidence session with the EA around nursing provision. I would just note we do have an assurance in writing from the Minister that there will be no changes to current provision in any school, but other than noting that, I would want to suggest we really do just keep a close eye on how this progresses and the progress of that review if members are agreed. Item 8.47 and 8.48 is a response from the Department of Education to a range of SEN queries. I'm going to propose that correspondence actually be retabled for next week because it came quite late as a tabled item, and it's quite substantive correspondence around SEN, around a whole range of things that we wanted information on, and I think there's a risk we could miss some follow-up there, so if members are agreed we'll get that retabled for next week. And finally, item 8.52, we have the EA press release on the budget pressures, which are substantial. We've already agreed to seek a detailed written briefing on the outworkings of the proposals in place for cost savings, so unless there's anything else, propose we note. Okay. Item 9, then, other than that, are we content to dispose of all other items of correspondence as per the summary note in your packs? Great. Item 9, forward work programme. Draft forward work programme, that's a different thing. Work programme at page 610. Ask the clerk to speak to this briefly, but I think it is I'm content to propose we endorse it unless there's anything specific you want to
Yeah,
add
no,
to it.
that's
You
great.
might call it a
Certainly.
work programme, I couldn't possibly.
Yeah, I know it was potentially a terrible Freudian slip there. And
Apart
then,
from the trip to Finland.
yes, absolutely. Yes. So that's item 9. If we're content to endorse that, are we agreed? And then finally, any other business?
Sorry, just next week. Sorry.
Yes.
I know Lucy Crehan isn't coming.
Yes.
Is Christine Council coming?
No.
So there's no briefing on the curriculum review at all next week, is that?
But we are.
No, and
we're
so
getting
the-
Rami in instead?
Yes, is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yes, no, I
Yeah.
just wanted
I mean, it was lined up that obviously today's briefing might have
Yeah.
segged into the
Yeah.
content next week, but
yes, no problem.
we'll reschedule them as soon as we can.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
fine. At least we're still filling the slot. Okay, item 10, any other business? Is there any? Nope. So item 11 is date, place and time of next meeting, and that's Wednesday the 12th of November, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And that leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Right.